My name is Derek, and I've been delivering food for Grubhub for about 3 years now. I work the night shift in Portland, Oregon, mostly because the pay is better and there's less traffic to deal with. Most nights are routine. Pick up some Thai food, drop it off at an apartment, collect a decent tip, and move on to the next order. But there's one delivery that still keeps me awake at night, and it happened just 2 months ago. It was a Tuesday in late October, around 11:30 p.m. The rain was coming down hard, which is typical for Portland that time of year, but it was heavier than usual. I was getting ready to call it a night when one last order popped up on my app. The payout was unusually high, $47 for what looked like a simple pickup, from a 24-hour diner called Mel's Kitchen. The delivery address was way out on the east side, in an area I'd only been to once or twice before. The customer's name was listed as M. Hendricks, and there were specific delivery instructions that caught my attention. Ring doorbell 3 times, wait exactly 30 seconds, then ring twice more. Leave food on porch and walk away immediately. Do not look back. I'd seen weird delivery instructions before. People who were paranoid about COVID, folks who had aggressive dogs, or customers who just didn't want to interact with drivers. But something about these instructions felt different. The phrasing was too precise, too urgent. Still, $47 was $47, and I needed the money. The pickup at Mel's Kitchen was straightforward enough. The order was already waiting, 2 large bags of food that felt surprisingly heavy. The night manager, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, handed them over without much conversation. As I was leaving, she called out to me, "Hey, you delivering to Hendricks?" I turned back. "Yeah, why?" She shook her head slowly. "That's the 3rd order this week to that address. Different drivers each time." She paused, wiping her hands on her apron. None of them wanted to go back there. "What do you mean?" "Just be careful out there. That area gets weird at night." I wanted to ask more questions, but she'd already turned away and was busy cleaning the grill. I loaded the food into my car and punched the address into my GPS. The route took me through increasingly rural areas, past strip malls and gas stations that had closed hours ago. The streetlights became fewer and farther between until I was driving through what felt like complete wilderness. After about 20 minutes, my GPS announced that I was approaching the destination. I slowed down, looking for house numbers, but most of the mailboxes were either missing or too rusted to read. Finally, I spotted a narrow gravel driveway with a barely visible 2847 painted on a piece of weathered wood. The driveway was longer than I expected, winding through tall pine trees that blocked out most of the moonlight. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating patches of overgrown grass and what looked like old car parts scattered along the path. After about a quarter mile, the trees opened up to reveal a small, single-story house. The place looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. The siding was a faded yellow with several boards missing or hanging loose. Most of the windows were covered with what appeared to be aluminum foil, and the front porch sagged under the weight of accumulated junk, old furniture, cardboard boxes, and things I couldn't identify in the dim light. But what struck me most was the silence. Even with my engine running, I could hear absolutely nothing. No insects, no wind through the trees, no distant traffic. It was as if the entire area existed in a vacuum of sound. I parked about 30 feet from the house, grabbed the food bags, and approached the front door. The porch steps creaked ominously under my weight, and I had to navigate around piles of debris to reach the door. There was no porch light, so I used my phone's flashlight to locate the doorbell. Following the instructions exactly, I rang the doorbell 3 times. The sound echoed strangely, as if the house was much larger inside than it appeared from the outside. I counted to 30, then rang twice more. Almost immediately, I heard movement from inside. Not footsteps, but a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. I set the food bags down on the porch and turned to walk away, but curiosity got the better of me. Despite the instructions, I glanced back over my shoulder. The front door was opening slowly, revealing nothing but darkness beyond the threshold. No person appeared. No hand reached out for the food. The door just hung open, like a mouth. That's when I heard the voice. "Derek!" It was barely a whisper, but it was definitely my name. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The customer shouldn't have known my name. It wasn't displayed on the delivery app. And I hadn't introduced myself. "Derek, come back." The voice was clearer now, and it sounded wrong somehow. Too deep, too hollow, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. I forced myself to keep walking toward my car, but the voice followed me. "Derek, I've been waiting for you." I broke into a run, fumbling for my car keys. Behind me, I heard the dragging sound again, but louder now, as if whatever was making it had moved onto the porch. I reached my car and yanked the door open, throwing myself inside and immediately hitting the lock button. In my rearview mirror, I could see a figure standing on the porch. It was tall and thin, unnaturally so, and it seemed to be wearing some kind of long coat or robe. But what terrified me most was that it appeared to be floating slightly above the porch floor, swaying back and forth like seaweed in an ocean current. I started the engine and threw the car into reverse, spinning gravel as I backed down the driveway as fast as I dared. The figure on the porch didn't move, but I could feel it watching me until the trees blocked my view. The drive back to town felt like it took hours, though my GPS said it was only 23 minutes. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see headlights following me, but the road behind me remained dark. When I finally reached the main highway, I pulled into a 24-hour gas station and sat in the parking lot trying to calm down. I called Grubhub support to report the delivery as completed, but when the representative asked if there were any issues, I found myself unable to explain what had happened. How do you tell someone that a customer knew your name when they shouldn't have, or that they appeared to be floating? Instead, I just said the delivery went fine, and ended the call. The next day, I tried to put the experience out of my mind. I told myself it had been a combination of fatigue, darkness, and an overactive imagination. Maybe the customer had somehow seen my name on a previous delivery, or maybe I'd misheard what they said. The floating figure was probably just a trick of shadows and distance. But 3 days later, I got another order to the same address. This time, the payout was even higher, $63, for what appeared to be the exact same order from Mel's Kitchen. The customer name was still M. Hendricks, and the delivery instructions were identical. I stared at my phone screen for a full minute before declining the order. There was no way I was going back to that house. I watched as the order bounced to other drivers in the area. Within minutes, it was accepted by someone else. I wondered if they would have the same experience I did, or if whatever was in that house was specifically interested in me. Over the next 2 weeks, I saw the same order appear on my app 6 more times. Each time, the payout increased. $75, $89, $102. The last time I saw it, the offer was for $127, which was more than I usually made in an entire night. But I declined every single one. Then, last Tuesday, I was working a particularly slow shift when my phone rang. It wasn't the Grubhub app. It was an actual phone call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello, Derek." It was the same voice from the house. Deep, hollow, wrong. "How did you get this number?" I managed to ask. "You left something at my house. I'd like to return it to you." I didn't leave anything. I just delivered food. There was a long pause, filled with what sounded like static or distant whispers. "You left your scent, Derek. Your essence. I've been savoring it, but I think it's time you came back to collect it." I hung up immediately and blocked the number. But over the next few days, I received calls from different numbers. Always the same voice. Always asking me to come back. I stopped answering calls from numbers I didn't recognize, but then the voice started leaving voicemails. Derek, I'm still waiting. Derek, the food is getting cold. Derek, I have something special prepared for you. The messages became more frequent and more disturbing. The voice began describing things about me that it shouldn't have known. What I was wearing, where I lived, what I'd had for breakfast. It was as if something was watching me constantly, learning about my life in intimate detail. Last week, I decided I'd had enough. I went to the police and tried to file a harassment report, but when I gave them the address on Hendricks Road, the officer looked confused. "Sir, there's no Hendricks Road in our jurisdiction. Are you sure you have the right address?" I showed him the delivery address on my phone, but he insisted there was no such road. He pulled up a map on his computer and showed me the area where I'd made the delivery. According to the official records, it was just empty forest land that had never been developed. "Maybe you got turned around in the dark," he suggested. "It's easy to get lost out there." But I knew what I'd seen. I had the GPS coordinates, the delivery confirmation, everything. Yet somehow, according to the city, the place I delivered to didn't exist. That night, I decided to drive back to the area during daylight hours. I wanted to prove to myself that the house was real, that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. I followed the same route my GPS had taken me. But when I reached the spot where the gravel driveway should have been, there was nothing but unbroken forest. I parked and walked into the trees looking for any sign of the house or driveway. After an hour of searching, I found something that made my blood run cold. Deep in the woods, partially hidden by fallen leaves and undergrowth, was a concrete foundation. It was the right size and shape to have supported a small house, but it was clearly decades old. Weeds and small trees were growing up through cracks in the concrete. Near the center of the foundation, I found a rusted metal sign that read, Hendricks 2847. Below that, in smaller letters, was a date, 1987 to 1994. I researched the property when I got home and found a newspaper article from 1994. A man named Martin Hendricks had lived alone in a house on that site. He'd been found dead after neighbors reported not seeing him for several weeks. The article said he'd apparently died of starvation, despite having a fully stocked kitchen. The house had been demolished shortly after his death due to what the article vaguely described as structural concerns and health code violations. But the most disturbing detail was in the final paragraph. According to the coroner's report, Hendricks had been dead for at least 3 months when his body was discovered. Yet neighbors reported seeing lights in the house and receiving food deliveries right up until the day the body was found. I haven't worked for Grubhub since then. I've switched to day shifts at a regular restaurant, and I never do deliveries anymore. But sometimes, late at night, my phone still rings. I don't answer, but the voicemails continue. Derek, I'm still waiting. Derek, I have your order ready. Derek, you can't avoid me forever. The last message I received was different from the others. Instead of the hollow, wrong voice I'd grown accustomed to, it sounded almost normal, almost human. Derek, thank you for the delivery. The food was delicious, but I'm still hungry, and I think it's time for the main course. I'll be seeing you soon. That was 3 days ago. Since then, I've been staying with friends, never sleeping in the same place twice. I've changed my phone number, but somehow the calls keep coming. And yesterday, I found something that made me realize I might never be safe. Taped to my car windshield was a receipt from Mel's kitchen. It was for the same order I delivered that night, 2 large bags of food, paid for by MC Hendricks. But at the bottom, in handwriting I didn't recognize, was a note. Delivery incomplete. Customer still waiting. Please return to complete order. I don't know what Martin Hendricks wants from me, or how something that died almost 30 years ago can still be placing food orders. All I know is that I made a delivery to a place that doesn't exist, to a customer who shouldn't be alive, and now I can't escape the consequences. If you're reading this and you work food delivery, Be careful about those late night orders with unusually high payouts. Sometimes the tip isn't worth the price you'll end up paying. And if you ever get an order for M. Hendrix on a road that doesn't exist, do yourself a favor. Decline the order and drive away as fast as you can, because some customers will never stop being hungry. My name is Jessica, and I've been delivering for DoorDash in Sacramento for about 8 months now. I started doing it to help pay off my student loans after graduating college, and honestly, it's been pretty decent work. Most of my deliveries are straightforward. Pick up some Chinese food, drop it off at a suburban house, maybe chat with a friendly customer for a minute, then move on to the next order. But there's one delivery that changed everything for me, and it happened just 6 weeks ago. It was a Friday night in early November, around 10:45 p.m. I was planning to wrap up my shift after one more delivery when a high-paying order came through. $38 for a pickup from a Mexican restaurant called Casa Bonita. The delivery address was in Midtown, which was a good area, so I accepted it without much thought. The order was for someone named Sarah Chen, and it was a pretty standard request: 2 burritos, chips, and guac, and a couple of sodas. The only unusual thing was a note in the special instructions. Please be very quiet when approaching the house. Ring doorbell once and step back immediately. Do not knock. I figured maybe she had a baby who was sleeping, or perhaps she lived with roommates who went to bed early. Either way, it seemed like a reasonable request. The pickup went smoothly. Casa Bonita had the order ready, and I was back on the road within 5 minutes. The GPS directed me to a quiet residential street lined with older craftsman-style homes. Most of the houses were dark, which made sense for that time of night on a weekday. I found the address, 1247 Elm Street, and parked across the street. The house was a modest 2-story, with a small front yard and a covered porch. There were no lights on that I could see, but that wasn't unusual for a late delivery. I grabbed the food bag and crossed the street, being careful to walk quietly as requested. The front porch had 2 steps leading up to a wooden door with a small window. I could see a doorbell button to the right of the door, so I pressed it once and immediately stepped back as instructed. The doorbell made a soft chiming sound, and I waited. After about 30 seconds, I heard footsteps inside the house. They were slow and deliberate, like someone trying to be quiet. The footsteps stopped just on the other side of the door, and I expected it to open, but nothing happened. I waited another minute, then softly called out, "DoorDash delivery for Sarah." The footsteps moved away from the door, deeper into the house. I heard what sounded like a door closing somewhere inside. Then silence. I tried calling the customer's phone number, but it went straight to voicemail. The message was brief and spoken in a whisper. "You've reached Sarah. I can't come to the phone right now. Please leave a message." I left a message explaining that I was outside with her food delivery, then hung up and waited. 5 more minutes passed with no response. I was starting to get frustrated. I had other deliveries to make, and standing on someone's porch at 11 p.m. wasn't exactly how I wanted to spend my Friday night. I decided to try the doorbell one more time. As I reached for the button, I noticed something that made me pause. The house number on the door read 1249, not 1247, as listed in the app. I pulled out my phone and double-checked the address. The app clearly showed 1247 Elm Street, but I was standing at 1249. I looked around and realized that the house to my left, which was completely dark, had the number 1247 on its mailbox. Feeling embarrassed about my mistake, I gathered up the food bag and walked over to the correct house. This one was smaller than the first, a single-story bungalow with an overgrown front yard. There were no cars in the driveway, and the windows were not just dark, but appeared to be covered with something from the inside. I approached the front door and immediately noticed that it was slightly ajar. Not wide open, but definitely not closed all the way. There was a gap of maybe 2 inches, and I could see nothing but darkness beyond it. I rang the doorbell, but I didn't hear any chiming sound. I tried again, pressing harder, but still nothing. The doorbell was either broken or disconnected. Following the customer's instructions not to knock, I called out softly, "Sarah?" DoorDash delivery. From inside the house came a voice, muffled and distant. "Come in." I'm in the back room. Every instinct I had told me not to enter a customer's house, especially one that was completely dark with an open door. But the voice had definitely said to come in, and I didn't want to leave the food on the porch where it might get stolen. I pushed the door open a little wider and called out, "Are you sure? I can just leave the food by the door." "Please bring it back here. I can't come to the front." The voice sounded strained, like the person might be injured or sick. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside the house. The smell hit me immediately. A mixture of something rotten and a chemical odor I couldn't identify. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam revealed a living room that looked like it hadn't been occupied in months. There was a thin layer of dust on everything, and the furniture was covered with white sheets. The air felt stale and heavy, like the house had been sealed up for a long time. "Hello," I called out, moving deeper into the house. "Where are you?" "Back here," came the voice, now clearly coming from somewhere toward the rear of the house, "in the kitchen." I followed a narrow hallway, my phone's light revealing peeling wallpaper and water stains on the ceiling. The smell was getting stronger, and I had to breathe through my mouth to keep from gagging. The hallway opened into a small kitchen. Like the living room, it appeared to have been abandoned. The refrigerator was unplugged and standing open, revealing empty, moldy shelves. The sink was full of what looked like black water, and there were dishes scattered on the counters that were covered in a fuzzy growth I didn't want to examine too closely. But there was no one in the kitchen. "Sarah!" I called out, starting to feel genuinely scared. "Where are you?" "Down here." The voice was coming from below me. I looked around and spotted a door that I'd initially thought was a pantry, but now realized must lead to a basement. It was standing open, and I could see wooden steps descending into darkness. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to leave. This was clearly not a normal delivery situation. The house was obviously abandoned, the customer was nowhere to be seen, and I was being led deeper into a dark basement by a disembodied voice. But something else was driving me forward. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was a genuine concern that someone might be hurt and need help. I approached the basement door and shined my light down the stairs. "Sarah, are you okay down there? Do you need me to call someone?" "Just come down. I have the tip for you." The voice was clearer now, and I realized something that made my skin crawl. It wasn't the same voice that had been calling to me from the back room. This voice was different, deeper, more masculine, and it was coming from directly below me, as if someone was standing at the bottom of the stairs. I backed away from the basement door, my heart pounding. "I'm just going to leave your food on the kitchen counter," I called out, setting the bag down and turning toward the hallway. "Don't leave, Jessica." I froze. The voice had used my name, but I hadn't told anyone in the house what my name was. DoorDash drivers don't typically introduce themselves to customers, and my name wasn't displayed anywhere the customer would have seen it. "How do you know my name?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We've been waiting for you, Jessica. We've been waiting for a long time." The voice was no longer coming from the basement, it was coming from behind me, from the hallway I just walked through. I spun around, shining my phone light toward the sound, but the hallway was empty. "We know all about you, Jessica. We know where you live. We know where you work. We know about your student loans and your little apartment on J Street." Now there were multiple voices coming from different directions. Some sounded male, others female. Some sounded young, others old. But they were all saying my name over and over, like a chant. Jessica, Jessica, Jessica. I ran. I didn't care about the food, the tip, or completing the delivery. I just ran through the dark house, following my phone's light back toward the front door. Behind me, I could hear footsteps. Not just one set, but many, as if a crowd of people was following me through the house. I burst through the front door and sprinted to my car, fumbling with my keys as the voices continued to call my name from inside the house. I managed to get the car started and drove away as fast as I could, not stopping until I was several miles away. When I finally pulled over to catch my breath, I realized I was shaking uncontrollably. I tried to make sense of what had just happened, but nothing about it made any logical sense. I called DoorDash support to report the incident, but when I tried to explain what had occurred, the representative seemed confused. "Ma'am, I'm not showing any delivery to 1247 Elm Street tonight. Are you sure you have the right address?" I checked my app, but the delivery had vanished from my history. There was no record of the order, no customer named Sarah Chen, no pickup from Casa Bonita. It was as if the entire delivery had never existed. The next day, I drove back to Elm Street during daylight hours. I wanted to see the house again, to prove to myself that what had happened was real. But when I found 1247 Elm Street, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. The house was completely boarded up. Plywood covered every window and door, and there were official notices posted warning against trespassing. The yard was overgrown with weeds that looked like they'd been growing for years, not months. I talked to a neighbor who was working in his garden next door. He told me that 1247 had been empty for over 3 years, ever since the previous owner had died. The city had been trying to sell it, but there had been problems with the property that kept falling through. "What kind of problems?" I asked. The neighbor looked uncomfortable. "Well, people kept reporting strange things. Lights in the windows at night, voices coming from inside. The real estate agents started refusing to show it after a while. Too many people got spooked." He paused, then added, "You're not the first person to ask about that place recently. There was a young woman here last week, said she'd been there for some kind of delivery. She looked pretty shaken up." I felt a chill run down my spine. What did she look like? Blonde hair, maybe mid-20s, driving a Honda with one of those food delivery signs on top. That description could have fit dozens of delivery drivers in the city, but something about it felt significant. I thanked the neighbor and left, but I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. Over the next few weeks, I started paying attention to other delivery drivers when I saw them at restaurants or on the road. I began asking casual questions about unusual deliveries or strange experiences. What I discovered was disturbing. At least 6 other drivers had stories about deliveries to addresses that didn't exist or houses that turned out to be abandoned. All of them involved orders that disappeared from their delivery history afterward, as if they'd never happened. And all of them had been called by name, by someone they'd never met. I started keeping a notebook, documenting every story I heard. The details varied, but there were consistent patterns. The deliveries always happened late at night. The houses were always dark or abandoned. The customers always knew the drivers' names, and the orders always vanished from the app afterward. Last week, I met a driver named Marcus, who told me about a delivery he'd made to an apartment complex that had been demolished 2 years earlier. He'd walked through the empty lot following his GPS coordinates that led to nothing but bare ground, while voices called his name from the darkness. "The weird thing," he said, "is that I keep getting orders to the same address. Different customer names, but always the same place that doesn't exist. And the payout keeps getting higher each time." I asked him what he did with those orders. "I decline them now," he said, "but they keep coming. Last night, the offer was for $89. That's more than I usually make in 3 hours. That night, I got an order that made my hands shake when I saw it. The pickup was from Casa Bonita. The delivery address was 1247 Elm Street, and the customer name was Sarah Chen. The payout was $127. I declined the order immediately, but it reappeared on my app 5 minutes later with a higher payout, $145. I declined again. It came back at $163. I turned off my app and went home, but I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID showed Sarah Chen. I didn't answer, but she left a voicemail. "Hi, Jessica. I'm still waiting for my food. I know you were here before, but you left without completing the delivery. I really need you to come back. We all do. We're so hungry, Jessica. We've been hungry for such a long time." The voicemail continued for another 2 minutes, with multiple voices taking turns speaking. They all knew details about my life that no stranger should have known. They knew about my college major, my childhood pet's name, the scar on my knee from when I fell off my bike at age 7. I've received 17 more calls since then, all from different numbers, but all with the same voices. They're getting more insistent, more demanding. The last message was different from the others. "Jessica, we're tired of waiting. If you won't come to us, we'll come to you. We know where you live. We know you're alone. We'll be there soon." That was yesterday. Since then, I've been staying with friends, never in the same place twice. I've reported everything to the police, but they can't do anything about prank calls from untraceable numbers. I've contacted DoorDash, but they have no record of any of the orders I've described. This morning, I found something taped to my car windshield. It was a receipt from Casa Bonita for 2 burritos, chips and guac, and 2 sodas. The customer name was Sarah Chen, and the delivery address was my apartment. At the bottom of the receipt, written in red ink, was a message. "Delivery in progress. Customer waiting at destination." I don't know what's happening to me, or why I was chosen for whatever this is. All I know is that I made a delivery to a house that shouldn't exist, to a customer who shouldn't be real, and now something is hunting me. If you work food delivery, be careful about those late-night orders to addresses you don't recognize. Check the house numbers carefully. Make sure the place actually exists before you get out of your car. And if you ever get an order for Sarah Chen on Elm Street, do yourself a favor and decline it. Keep declining it, no matter how high the payout gets. Because some deliveries are never meant to be completed, and some customers will never stop being hungry. My name is Alex, and I've been driving for Uber Eats in Denver for almost 2 years now. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills while I'm trying to get my music career off the ground. Most nights, I cruise around the city listening to podcasts, picking up orders from the same handful of restaurants, and dropping them off at familiar apartment complexes and suburban houses. But 6 weeks ago, I had an experience that made me question everything I thought I knew about this job. It started on a Wednesday night in mid-October. I'd been having a slow evening, only 3 deliveries in 4 hours, which barely covered my gas money. I was about to call it quits when my phone buzzed with an order that seemed too good to be true. The pickup was from a place called Tony's Italian Kitchen that I'd never heard of, despite knowing most of the restaurants in my delivery zone. The payout was $73 for what appeared to be a simple pasta order, and the delivery address was only 12 minutes away. The customer's name was listed as David Martinez. What really caught my attention were the delivery notes. Urgent. Regular driver called in sick. You are covering his route tonight. Customer is expecting you. Do not deviate from the instructions below. Below that was a detailed set of directions that seemed unnecessarily specific. Instead of just providing the address, the notes included turn-by-turn directions that took a route I'd never used before, even though I knew a much more direct way to get to that part of town. The instructions continued. Park exactly 47 feet from the front door. Count your steps. Ring doorbell 4 times in rapid succession, then wait exactly 90 seconds. Customer will leave payment in the mailbox. Take payment, leave food on doorstep, return to vehicle immediately. Do not speak to customer. Do not look directly at customer if they appear. I'd seen plenty of weird delivery instructions before. People with social anxiety, folks who were immunocompromised, customers who just didn't want to interact with drivers. But this felt different. The level of detail was obsessive, almost ritualistic. Still, $73 was more than I usually made in 3 hours, so I accepted the order and headed to Tony's Italian Kitchen. The GPS led me to a strip mall in a part of town I rarely visited. Most of the storefronts were empty, with for lease signs and dusty windows, but I found Tony's squeezed between a closed dry cleaner and a vacant space that used to be a cell phone repair shop. The restaurant looked like it had been there for decades. The neon sign was partially burned out, reading TNY's Italian Kit N, and the windows were so grimy I couldn't see inside. When I pushed open the door, a bell chimed with a sound that seemed to echo longer than it should have. The interior was dimly lit and completely empty of customers. An elderly man with thick glasses and a stained apron stood behind the counter, as if he'd been waiting for me. "You're the substitute?" he said before I could speak. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, I'm here for the David Martinez order." He nodded and disappeared into the back without another word. I stood there for several minutes, listening to the hum of old refrigeration units and the distant sound of something sizzling on a grill. The smell in the air was strange. Not quite Italian food, but something I couldn't identify. When the man returned, he was carrying a large, insulated bag that seemed heavier than a typical pasta order should be. He handed it to me, along with a receipt that was handwritten in faded blue ink. "Follow the instructions exactly," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The customer is very particular about his routine. "What happened to the regular driver?" I asked. The old man's expression darkened. "He won't be coming back." Before I could ask what that meant, he turned away and busied himself with cleaning glasses that already looked spotless. I took the hint and left, the bell chiming, that same unnaturally long note as the door closed behind me. I loaded the food into my car and punched in the address, but instead of using my usual GPS, I decided to follow the specific directions in the delivery notes. The route took me through parts of Denver I'd never seen before, down narrow residential streets lined with houses that all seemed to be from the same era, probably built in the 1950s or 60s. As I drove, I noticed something odd. Every house I passed was dark, not just the kind of dark you'd expect at 10 p.m. on a Wednesday, but completely dark. No porch lights, no glow from televisions, no street lamps. It was as if this entire neighborhood existed in a pocket of perpetual night. The directions led me to a cul-de-sac at the end of a street called Maple Grove Lane. There was only one house visible, a modest ranch-style home, with a well-maintained yard and a driveway that looked like it had been recently repaved. Unlike the other houses I'd passed, this one had lights on in several windows. I parked where the instructions specified and got out to measure the distance to the front door. 47 feet. Just as the notes had indicated. I grabbed the insulated bag and walked toward the house, counting my steps as instructed. The front yard was perfectly manicured with flower beds that looked professionally maintained despite the late season. As I got closer to the house, I could hear the sound of a television playing inside. Some kind of game show with canned laughter and applause. I reached the front door and rang the doorbell 4 times, in rapid succession, just as the instructions specified. The sound echoed through the house, and I heard the television volume decrease. Then I waited, counting the seconds in my head. At exactly 90 seconds, I heard footsteps approaching the door from inside. They were slow and deliberate, with an odd rhythm. Step, pause, step, pause, as if the person was limping or dragging something. The footsteps stopped just on the other side of the door, and I could sense someone standing there, but the door didn't open. Instead, I heard a voice that made my skin crawl. "Are you the substitute?" The voice was wrong in a way I couldn't immediately identify. It sounded human, but there was something artificial about it, like someone doing a bad impression of how a person should sound. Yes, I replied, remembering the instructions not to deviate from the routine. Good. The regular driver was becoming unreliable. I heard the footsteps move away from the door, heading toward what I assumed was the side of the house, where the mailbox was located. Following the instructions, I walked over to the mailbox and found an envelope with payment written on it in the same faded blue ink I'd seen on the receipt. Inside the envelope was $73 in cash, exactly matching the amount shown in the app. But there was also something else, a small piece of paper with a message written in different handwriting. Don't come back. This isn't what you think it is. Miguel. I assumed Miguel must have been the regular driver who'd called in sick. The note was unsettling, but I'd already taken the payment, so I needed to complete the delivery. I walked back to the front door and set the insulated bag on the doorstep as instructed. As I turned to walk back to my car, I heard the front door open behind me. Every instinct told me not to look back, but curiosity got the better of me. I glanced over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. The figure standing in the doorway was tall and thin, wearing what looked like a bathrobe or hospital gown. But something was wrong with its proportions. The arms were too long, hanging down past where the knees should be, and the head seemed too small for the body. In the dim porch light, I couldn't make out any facial features, just a smooth, pale surface where a face should have been. The figure was holding the insulated bag, but instead of taking the food out, it was just standing there, motionless, as if it was watching me. I forced myself to turn away and walk back to my car, fighting the urge to run. As I drove away from the house, I checked my rearview mirror and saw the figure still standing in the doorway, holding the bag. It remained there until I turned the corner and lost sight of it. The drive back to the main part of town felt like it took forever. I kept expecting to see the strange neighborhood again, but instead, I found myself on familiar streets much sooner than I should have. It was as if the route back was completely different from the route I'd taken to get there. When I got home, I tried to research Tony's Italian Kitchen online, but I couldn't find any mention of it. No website, no reviews, no listings in any food delivery apps, other than the order I just completed. It was as if the restaurant didn't exist outside of that one delivery. I also tried to look up Maple Grove Lane, but according to every map I checked, there was no such street in Denver. The address I delivered to simply didn't exist in any official records. The next night, I got another order from Tony's Italian Kitchen. Same customer, same instructions, same $73 payout. This time, the delivery notes included an additional line. Miguel will not be returning. You are now the regular driver for this route. I declined the order immediately, but it reappeared on my app 5 minutes later with a higher payout, $89. I declined again, and it came back at $105. Each time I declined, the amount increased. Finally, I turned off my app and went home, but I couldn't stop thinking about Miguel's note. What had happened to the previous driver, and what did he mean when he said, "This isn't what you think it is"? Over the next few days, I started asking other Uber Eats drivers if they'd ever heard of Tony's Italian Kitchen or delivered to Maple Grove Lane. Most of them had never heard of either, but I found 2 drivers who had similar stories. The first was a woman named Sarah who told me about a delivery she'd made to a house that didn't exist on any map. She'd been told she was covering for a driver named Carlos who had moved away suddenly. The customer had known details about her life that no stranger should have known, and the payment had included a note warning her not to come back. The second was a guy named Jake who delivered to what he thought was an apartment complex, but when he tried to find it again the next day, there was nothing but an empty lot. He'd been told he was replacing a driver named Amanda who had decided to pursue other opportunities. I started to see a pattern. Drivers were being recruited to cover routes for people who had mysteriously disappeared, and those routes led to places that shouldn't exist. But what was the purpose? What was happening to the drivers who didn't heed the warnings? Last week I got my answer. I was working a late shift when I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, I heard a familiar voice. The same artificial sounding voice from the house on Maple Grove Lane. "Hello, Alex. We've been waiting for you to return." "I'm not coming back," I said. "Find someone else." "But you're our regular driver now. Miguel is no longer available. And we have such a good working relationship." "What happened to Miguel?" There was a long pause, filled with what sounded like static or distant whispers. "Miguel became part of our family. He's very happy here. Would you like to speak with him?" Before I could respond, I heard another voice on the line. It was definitely human, but it sounded hollow and distant, like someone speaking from the bottom of a well. "Alex? This is Miguel. You need to stay away from Tony's. Don't take any more orders from there. They're not what they seem. They're collecting us, Alex. They're collecting drivers, and once you're here, you can't leave. I've been trying to warn people, but they keep finding new drivers to replace us. Please, just stay away." The line went dead. Since then, I've received dozens of calls from the same number. Sometimes it's the artificial voice, sometimes it's Miguel, and sometimes it's voices I don't recognize. Other drivers who've been collected, all warning me to stay away, while simultaneously begging me to help them. The orders from Tony's Italian Kitchen keep appearing on my app, with payouts that have now reached over $200. Each time I decline, I get a call within minutes. We're very patient, Alex, but our patience isn't infinite. You belong with us now. You're part of our route. Yesterday, I found something that made me realize I might not have a choice much longer. Taped to my car windshield was a delivery receipt from Tony's Italian Kitchen. The customer name was Alex Thompson, my own name, and the delivery address was my apartment. At the bottom of the receipt, written in that familiar faded blue ink, was a message. "Final delivery scheduled. Driver will be collected upon completion." I don't know what these things want or why they're targeting delivery drivers specifically. All I know is that they're building some kind of collection, and I'm next on their list. If you work food delivery and you get an order from a restaurant you've never heard of to an address that seems too specific, with instructions that feel more like a ritual than a delivery, decline it. Keep declining it, no matter how high the payout gets. And if you ever get a call telling you that you're covering for a driver who won't be coming back, hang up immediately and find a new job. Because some routes don't lead to customers. They lead to collectors. And once you're part of their collection, you'll spend eternity trying to warn the next driver, knowing they probably won't listen until it's too late. My name is Marcus, and I've been delivering for Postmates in Phoenix for about 14 months now. I picked up the gig after losing my job at a warehouse, and while it's not exactly a career, it keeps me afloat while I figure out my next move. Phoenix is a good city for delivery work. Lots of sprawl, plenty of restaurants, and people who'd rather order in than deal with the heat. Most of my deliveries are routine. Pick up some Thai food from a strip mall, drop it off at a gated community, maybe exchange pleasantries with a customer who tips in cash. But there's one delivery that happened 3 months ago that still haunts me, and I'm starting to think it's not over yet. It was a Thursday night in late August, around 1:15 a.m. I was working the late shift because that's when the surge pricing kicks in. Drunk college kids ordering fast food, night shift workers grabbing dinner, insomniacs satisfying random cravings. The money was better, even if the customers were sometimes weird. I just finished dropping off some burgers to a group of ASU students when a new order popped up on my app. The pickup was from a 24-hour diner called Midnight Express that I'd never heard of, despite knowing most of the late-night spots in the city. The payout was unusually high, $67 for what looked like a simple breakfast order. The customer's name was listed as Robert Vance, and the delivery address was in Ahwatukee, a suburb on the south side of Phoenix that I didn't visit often. What caught my attention were the delivery instructions. Driver must arrive between 2 a.m. and 2:15 a.m. exactly. Ring doorbell twice, count to 10. Ring once more. Customer will meet you at the side gate. Do not go to front door under any circumstances. I'd seen specific delivery instructions before, but these felt different. The time window was oddly precise, and the emphasis on not using the front door seemed strange. Still, $67 was more than I usually made in 2 hours, so I accepted the order. The GPS directed me to an industrial area I'd never been to before, full of warehouses and auto repair shops that were closed for the night. I drove for about 10 minutes through increasingly empty streets before finding Midnight Express, tucked between a tire shop and a building supply store. The diner looked like it had been there since the 1960s. Chrome exterior, neon sign that flickered intermittently, and windows so tinted I couldn't see inside. There were no other cars in the parking lot, which seemed odd for a place that was supposedly open 24 hours. When I walked inside, the first thing that hit me was the smell. Not the usual diner smell of coffee and grease, but something medicinal, like disinfectant mixed with something I couldn't identify. The interior was dimly lit by fluorescent lights that hummed loudly, and most of the booths were empty except for a few customers who sat alone, not eating, just staring at empty plates. Behind the counter stood a woman who looked to be in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. She was wearing a standard diner uniform, but it looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. When she saw me, she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're here for the Vance order," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, Postmates pickup." She nodded and disappeared into the kitchen without another word. I stood there for several minutes, listening to the hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional clink of silverware from the few customers. None of them looked up at me or acknowledged my presence in any way. When the waitress returned, she was carrying a large paper bag that seemed heavier than a typical breakfast order should be. She handed it to me along with a receipt that was handwritten in pencil. "Make sure you follow the instructions exactly," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Vance is very particular about timing." "What happens if I'm late?" I asked, trying to make conversation. Her smile disappeared entirely. "You won't be late." The way she said it made my skin crawl, but I took the bag and left. As I walked back to my car, I noticed that none of the customers had moved since I'd arrived. They were still sitting in the same positions, staring at their empty plates like mannequins in a store window. The drive to Ahwatukee took about 25 minutes, which would put me at the delivery address right around 2 a.m. as specified. The route took me through parts of Phoenix I rarely saw. Older neighborhoods with houses that all looked the same, built during the city's rapid expansion in the 1980s. As I got closer to the address, I noticed something strange. Every house I passed was completely dark. Not just the normal darkness of people sleeping, but the kind of darkness that suggested the houses were empty. No porch lights, no security lights, no glow from electronics. It was as if I was driving through a neighborhood that had been abandoned. The GPS led me to a cul-de-sac at the end of a street called Desert View Drive. There was only one house visible, a large 2-story with a circular driveway and a front yard that was perfectly maintained despite the late hour. Unlike the other houses I'd passed, this one had lights on in several windows. I checked the time on my phone. 2:03 a.m. Perfect timing. I parked in the driveway and grabbed the paper bag, which felt even heavier than it had at the restaurant. As I approached the house, I could hear the sound of classical music playing inside. Something slow and melancholy that seemed to drift through the walls. Following the instructions, I walked to the front door and rang the doorbell twice. I counted to 10, then rang once more. Almost immediately, I heard footsteps inside the house, but they were moving away from the front door, toward what I assumed was the side of the house. I walked around to the side yard and found a wooden gate that was standing slightly open. Through the gap, I could see a figure waiting in the shadows, tall and thin, wearing what looked like a dark suit. "You're punctual," the figure said as I approached. The voice was cultured, with a slight accent I couldn't place. "I appreciate that in a delivery person." "No problem," I replied, holding out the bag. That'll be "The payment has already been arranged," he interrupted, taking the bag from my hands. "But I have a proposition for you." In the dim light from the house, I could see that the man was probably in his 60s, with silver hair and pale skin that seemed to glow in the darkness. He was impeccably dressed, but there was something off about his appearance that I couldn't quite identify. "I'm looking for a regular delivery person," he continued. "Someone reliable. Someone who can follow instructions precisely. The pay would be substantial." "How substantial?" I asked, despite every instinct telling me to leave. $500 per delivery. 3 deliveries per week. Always the same time, always the same instructions. $1,500 a week was more money than I'd ever made in my life. It was enough to get my own apartment, maybe even go back to school. But something about the offer felt wrong. "What kind of deliveries?" I asked. The man smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too white and too sharp. "The same kind you just made. Simple food orders from Midnight Express. Nothing illegal, nothing dangerous, just specialized service for specialized customers." "I'll think about it," I said, backing toward the gate. "Of course, but don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often." As I walked back to my car, I could feel him watching me from the shadows. When I reached the driveway, I looked back and saw that he was still standing by the gate, motionless, like a statue. The drive home felt longer than it should have. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see headlights following me, but the roads were empty. When I finally reached my apartment, I sat in the parking lot for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. The next morning, I tried to research Midnight Express online, but I couldn't find any mention of it. No website, no reviews, no business listings. According to every search I did, the diner didn't exist. I also tried to look up the address where I'd made the delivery, but the results were confusing. Some maps showed Desert View Drive ending in a cul-de-sac, while others showed it as a through street. The house number I delivered to didn't appear in any property records I could find. 3 days later, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, I heard the same cultured voice from the delivery. "Marcus, I trust you've had time to consider my offer." "How did you get this number?" I asked. "I have my ways. Have you made a decision?" "I'm not interested," I said, though the money was tempting. "That's unfortunate. I was hoping we could work together, but I understand your hesitation. Perhaps you need more time to see the benefits of our arrangement." "What do you mean?" "Check your bank account, Marcus." I hung up and immediately opened my banking app. There was a deposit I didn't recognize, $500 posted that morning. The description simply read, "Delivery services." I called the bank, but they couldn't tell me where the deposit had come from. The transaction appeared to be legitimate, processed through their normal systems, but there was no record of who had initiated it. Over the next week, I received similar deposits every few days. Always $500, always with the same description. I tried to refuse the money, but there was no way to return it without knowing who had sent it. Then, the orders started appearing on my Postmates app. Every few nights, usually around 1 a.m., I would get an order from Midnight Express for delivery to Desert View Drive. The payout was always exactly $67, and the customer was always Robert Vance. Each time, I declined the order, but it would reappear on my app within minutes. After declining the same order 5 times in one night, my phone rang. "Marcus, you're being unprofessional. Mr. Vance is a valued customer, and he specifically requested you as his delivery person." "I told you I'm not interested." "But you've already been paid. The deposits in your account represent advance payment for services. You're contractually obligated to fulfill the deliveries." "I never signed any contract." "Accepting the payment constitutes agreement to our terms. I'm afraid you don't have a choice in the matter." The line went dead. The next night, the orders came more frequently. Every hour, a new delivery request from Midnight Express would appear in my app. Each time I declined, the payout increased. $67, $89, $134, $201. By 3 a.m., the offers had reached $500 for a single delivery. I turned off my app and went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. Around 4 a.m., I heard a car door slam outside my apartment. I looked out the window and saw a black sedan parked in the lot, but I couldn't see who was inside. The car stayed there for the rest of the night. The next evening, I found a package outside my apartment door. Inside was a Postmates delivery bag and a note written in elegant handwriting. Your equipment for tonight's deliveries. First pickup at Midnight Express, 1:30 a.m. Customers waiting. I threw the bag in the trash and double locked my door, but around 1 a.m. my phone started ringing. The same unknown number over and over. I didn't answer, but the caller left voicemails. Marcus, Mr. Vance is very disappointed. He's been waiting for his delivery. Marcus, you're causing unnecessary complications. Please report to Midnight Express immediately. Marcus, we're running out of patience. There will be consequences if you continue to ignore your obligations. The calls continued all night. Different numbers, but always the same voice. Always the same message. I was expected to make deliveries, and my refusal was causing problems. The next morning, I woke up to find the delivery bag sitting on my kitchen counter, even though I was certain I'd thrown it away. Next to it was a receipt from Midnight Express for an order I'd never picked up, with my name listed as the driver. That's when I realized they'd been in my apartment while I was sleeping. I called the police, but what could I tell them? That someone was forcing me to deliver food? That I was receiving mysterious deposits in my bank account? That a diner that didn't exist was sending me orders for a customer who lived at an address that might not be real? The officer who took my report was polite, but clearly thought I was either lying or having some kind of mental health crisis. He suggested I change my locks and maybe talk to someone about stress management. Last week, things escalated. I was working a normal shift, trying to ignore the constant Midnight Express orders that kept appearing on my app when I got a delivery request that made my blood run cold. The pickup was from a restaurant I recognized, but the delivery address was my own apartment. The customer name was Marcus Thompson, my own name. I declined the order immediately, but within minutes my phone rang. Marcus, you have a delivery waiting. The customer is getting impatient. That's my own address. I didn't order anything. The customer specifically requested you as the driver. He's waiting at your apartment right now. I hung up and drove home as fast as I could. When I arrived, I saw the black sedan parked in my usual spot. Standing next to it was the man from Desert View Drive, still wearing his dark suit, still smiling that unsettling smile. He was holding a paper bag from the restaurant where the pickup had been scheduled. Hello, Marcus. I brought your dinner. I stayed in my car, engine running. What do you want? I want you to fulfill your obligations. You've been paid for services, and those services must be rendered. It's really quite simple. I'm not doing any more deliveries for you. His smile widened, revealing those two sharp teeth. Oh, but you are. You see, we've been watching you, Marcus. We know your routines, your habits, your weaknesses. We know about your sister in Tucson, your mother in Flagstaff. We know where they live, where they work, where they feel safe. The threat was clear, even though he'd never explicitly stated it. 1 delivery per week, he continued. Same time, same instructions. In exchange, your family remains safe, and you continue to receive your payments. It's really quite generous. I wanted to refuse, to drive away and never look back, but the thought of something happening to my family because of my stubbornness was too much to bear. Fine, I said. 1 delivery per week. Excellent. Your next pickup is tomorrow night at 1:30 a.m. Don't be late. He set the paper bag on the hood of my car and walked back to the sedan. As he drove away, I noticed that the license plate was completely blank. That was 6 days ago. Tomorrow night, I have to make another delivery to Desert View Drive. I don't know what's in the bags I've been carrying, or who Robert Vance really is, or what happens to the food after I deliver it. All I know is that I'm trapped in some kind of arrangement that I never agreed to, delivering mysterious packages to a customer who might not be human, working for people who can enter my apartment at will and threaten my family with impunity. If you work food delivery and you get an offer that seems too good to be true, it probably is. If someone offers you regular work with unusually high pay, ask questions. Lots of questions. And if you ever get an order from Midnight Express for delivery Desert View Drive, decline it immediately and find a new job. Because some customers don't just want food. They want drivers. And once they have you, they'll never let you go. My name is Carmen, and I've been delivering for Grubhub in Tampa for about 10 months now. I started doing it part-time while finishing my nursing degree. But after graduation, I kept the job while looking for hospital positions. The flexibility was nice, and the money wasn't bad, especially during the dinner rush and late-night hours when surge pricing kicked in. Most of my deliveries were straightforward, chain restaurants to apartment complexes, local joints to suburban houses. I knew the city well enough to avoid the sketchy areas, and I developed a routine that kept me safe and profitable. But 2 months ago, I had an experience that made me realize some dangers can't be avoided, no matter how careful you are. It started on a Sunday evening in early September. I'd been having a decent night, 6 deliveries in 4 hours, with tips that put me ahead of my usual earnings. I was considering calling it quits when a high-paying order appeared on my app that caught my attention. The pickup was from a place called Rosario's Family Kitchen, which I'd never heard of despite knowing most of the restaurants in my delivery zone. The order was substantial, $127 worth of food for what appeared to be a family dinner. The payout was $43, which was excellent for a single delivery. The customer's name was listed as Elena Vasquez, and the delivery address was in Westchase, an upscale suburb where I'd made deliveries before. What made this order unusual were the delivery notes. Important. You are filling in for our regular driver, Maria Santos, who is no longer available. Customer is expecting you at exactly 8:30 p.m. Use side entrance only. Ring bell 3 times and announce yourself as Maria's replacement. Customer will provide additional instructions upon arrival. I found it odd that the notes specifically mentioned replacing another driver. But restaurant customers sometimes develop relationships with regular delivery people. Maybe Maria had quit or switched to a different service, and the customer wanted to make sure the new driver knew the routine. The pickup location led me to a small strip mall in an older part of Tampa. Rosario's Family Kitchen was squeezed between a laundromat and a check cashing place, with a hand-painted sign that looked like it had been there for decades. The windows were covered with faded posters, advertising daily specials in both English and Spanish. When I walked inside, the smell of authentic Mexican cooking hit me immediately. Cumin, cilantro, and something else I couldn't identify, but that made my mouth water. The restaurant was small, with maybe 8 tables and completely empty of customers despite being dinner time on a Sunday. Behind the counter stood an elderly woman with silver hair pulled back in a bun. She was wearing a traditional Mexican dress and an apron that had seen better days. When she saw me, her face lit up with a smile that seemed genuinely warm. "You must be Carmen," she said in accented English. "I am Rosa. Thank you for helping us tonight." "No problem. I'm here for the Elena Vasquez order." Her smile faltered slightly. "See, Elena, she is, how do you say, very particular about her deliveries. You must follow the instructions exactly, or she becomes upset." "What happened to Maria? The regular driver?" Rosa's expression darkened and she crossed herself quickly. "Maria, she had to go away, very suddenly. Elena was not happy about this." Before I could ask more questions, Rosa disappeared into the kitchen. I could hear her moving around, the sound of containers being packed, and what sounded like a whispered conversation in Spanish, though I couldn't see anyone else back there. When she returned, she was carrying 3 large bags that seemed heavier than typical takeout containers. She also handed me a small piece of paper with additional instructions written in careful handwriting. "You must read this before you arrive," she said, pressing the paper into my hand. "And Carmen, be very careful tonight. Elena is not like other customers." "What do you mean?" Rosa glanced around nervously, as if checking to make sure we were alone. "Just follow the instructions exactly. Do not deviate. Do not ask questions. And do not let her convince you to stay." The way she said it made my skin crawl, but I took the bags and the paper and headed back to my car. As I loaded the food, I unfolded the additional instructions Rosa had given me. The note was written in the same careful handwriting. "Elena will ask you to bring the food inside. You must refuse. She will offer you money to stay and help serve the food. You must refuse. She will tell you that Maria always came inside. This is a lie. Maria never went inside, and neither should you. Leave the food at the side door and go immediately. Do not look back. Do not listen if she calls your name." I read the note 3 times, trying to make sense of it. Why would a customer want me to come inside? And why was Rosa so insistent that I refuse? The whole situation felt off, but $43 was $43, and I dealt with eccentric customers before. The drive to West Chase took about 20 minutes. The neighborhood was exactly what I expected. Large houses with manicured lawns, 3-car garages, and the kind of security systems that made delivery drivers feel both safe and unwelcome. Most of the houses had their porch lights on and showed signs of normal family life. Televisions glowing through windows, cars and driveways, the occasional dog barking. The GPS led me to a house at the end of a cul-de-sac. It was larger than most of the others, a 2-story Mediterranean-style home with a circular driveway and elaborate landscaping. But unlike the neighboring houses, this one felt different. All the windows were covered with heavy curtains, and the only light visible was a dim glow from what appeared to be the front hallway. I parked in the driveway and checked the time. 8:28 p.m. Perfect timing. I grabbed the 3 bags and walked around to the side of the house, looking for the side entrance mentioned in the instructions. The side yard was darker than the front, with tall hedges that blocked most of the light from the street. I found a door that appeared to lead into a mudroom or utility area, with a small porch light that cast everything in an eerie yellow glow. Following the instructions, I rang the doorbell 3 times and called out, "This is Maria's replacement with your Grubhub order." Almost immediately, I heard footsteps approaching from inside the house. They were quick and light, like someone hurrying to answer the door. When the door opened, I found myself face to face with a woman who appeared to be in her 40s, with long black hair and pale skin that seemed to glow in the porch light. "Oh, wonderful," she said, her voice bright and cheerful. I was so worried when Maria stopped coming. "Please, bring the food inside. I have the table all set up." "I'm sorry, but I need to leave the food here," I said, setting the bags down on the small porch. "Company policy." Her smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force. "Nonsense! Maria always brought the food inside. It's a family tradition. I insist." "I really can't. I'll give you an extra $50, she interrupted, reaching into her purse. "Cash. Just help me carry everything to the dining room." The offer was tempting, but Rosa's warnings echoed in my head. "I'm sorry, but I have other deliveries waiting. The food is right here for you." Elena's expression changed completely. The cheerful mask slipped away, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "You're not being very helpful." Marie understood the importance of good service. "I hope you enjoy your dinner," I said, backing away from the door. "Wait," Elena called out, her voice taking on a desperate edge. "You don't understand. I need help with something. It's very important. Maria always helped me." I continued walking toward my car, but Elena followed me, still talking. "There's been a mistake with the order. Some of the food is wrong. I need you to take it back to the restaurant and get it corrected." I turned around to face her. If there's a problem with the order, you can call the restaurant directly or contact Grubhub customer service. But you're here now. It would be so much easier if you just came inside for a moment. I can show you exactly what's wrong. There was something in her voice that made my skin crawl. A neediness that felt predatory rather than genuine. I quickened my pace toward my car. "Please," Elena called out, her voice echoing in the quiet cul-de-sac. "I'm all alone here. I just need someone to talk to for a few minutes." Maria understood. She was my friend. I reached my car and got inside, locking the doors immediately. Through the windshield, I could see Elena standing in her driveway, still calling out to me. But as I started the engine and began to back out, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were other figures standing in the shadows around the house. At least 3 or 4 people, all perfectly still, all watching me. They were positioned at different points around the property. By the front door, near the garage, at the edge of the side yard where I'd made the delivery. I couldn't make out their faces in the darkness, but they all seemed to be wearing similar clothing. Dark, formal outfits that looked out of place for a casual Sunday evening. And they were all unnaturally still, like mannequins positioned around the property. As I drove away, I checked my rearview mirror and saw Elena still standing in the driveway. But the other figures had vanished. It was as if they'd never been there at all. The drive back to the main part of town felt longer than usual. I kept thinking about Rosa's warnings and Elena's desperate attempts to get me inside the house. What had she really wanted? And what had happened to Maria, the previous driver? The next day, I tried to research Elena Vasquez and the address where I'd made the delivery. The house was listed in property records, but the owner was shown as E. Vasquez Trust, with no additional details. I couldn't find any social media profiles or other information about Elena herself. I also tried calling Rosario's family kitchen to ask about Maria, but the number went to a disconnected message. When I drove by the strip mall later that week, I found that the restaurant was closed, with a for lease sign in the window. 3 weeks later, I got another order from Rosario's family kitchen. The pickup location was the same strip mall, but when I arrived, the restaurant was open again, as if it had never been closed. Rosa was behind the counter, wearing the same dress and apron, smiling the same warm smile. "Carmen, so good to see you again. Elena has been asking for you specifically." "I thought the restaurant was closed," I said. Rosa looked confused. "Closed?" "No, we are always open for Elena. She is a very important customer." The order was identical to the previous one. $127 worth of food. Same delivery address, same instructions. But this time, the payout was $67, significantly higher than before. "What happened to Maria?" I asked as Rosa prepared the bags. Her expression darkened again. "Maria, she decided to stay with Elena. She helps with the family dinners now." Elena was very pleased. "What do you mean, stay with Elena?" "Elena needs help with her entertaining. She has many guests, and Maria was very good at serving. Elena offered her a permanent position." Something about the way Rosa said permanent position made my stomach turn. "Can I talk to Maria? Get her phone number?" Rosa shook her head. "Maria does not use the phone anymore. She is very busy with her new duties." I took the bags and left, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened to Maria. The way Rosa talked about her staying with Elena sounded less like a job opportunity and more like something permanent and inescapable. This time, when I arrived at Elena's house, I noticed more details that I'd missed before. The landscaping was too perfect, like a movie set. The windows weren't just covered with curtains, they were boarded up from the inside. And the house was completely silent, despite Elena claiming to have family dinners with multiple guests. Elena answered the side door before I even rang the bell. as if she'd been watching for me. "Carmen, I'm so happy you came back. I have a proposition for you." "I'm just here to deliver the food," I said, setting the bags down quickly. "I know you've been asking about Maria. Would you like to see her? She's inside, helping with dinner preparations." Every instinct I had screamed at me to leave, but curiosity got the better of me. "She's here?" "Of course. She loves her new position, much better than driving around all night, delivering food to strangers. Here, she's part of the family." Elena stepped aside and gestured toward the open door. "Just come in for a moment. Maria would love to see you." I could see into the house now, and what I saw made my blood freeze. The interior was set up like a restaurant, with multiple tables arranged throughout what should have been a living room. Each table was set for dinner, with plates and silverware and glasses, but every seat was occupied by a person who sat perfectly still. They were all wearing the same dark, formal clothing I'd glimpsed in the shadows during my first delivery, and they were all staring straight ahead, not moving, not blinking, not breathing. At one of the tables, I could see a young woman with short brown hair, wearing a Grubhub delivery shirt. She was sitting with the same unnatural stillness as the others, her eyes fixed on some point in the distance. "That's Maria," Elena said, following my gaze. "She's been such a wonderful addition to our family dinners. Would you like to join her?" I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. "I have to go." "But you haven't even met the other guests. We have drivers from all the delivery services. DoorDash, Uber Eats, Postmates. They all love it here. No more driving around in the dark. No more dealing with rude customers. Just peaceful family dinners. Forever and ever." I turned and ran to my car, Elena's voice following me across the yard. "You can't avoid it forever, Carmen. We need a new server, and you're perfect for the position. Maria will train you." I drove away as fast as I could, but in my rearview mirror, I could see Elena standing in the doorway, still calling out to me. And behind her, I could see the motionless figures at their tables, including the woman in the Grubhub shirt, who had once been Maria Santos. Since then, I've received the same order every few weeks. Always from Rosario's family kitchen, always for Elena Vasquez, always with a higher payout than the last time. The most recent offer was for $156, more than I usually make in an entire night. I decline every order, but they keep coming. And sometimes, late at night when I'm working, I see a familiar car following me. A dark sedan with tinted windows that stays just far enough back to avoid being obvious. Last week I found something that confirmed my worst fears. Taped to my apartment door was a missing person flyer with Maria Santos' picture on it. According to the flyer, she'd been missing for 3 months, exactly when I started getting orders to replace her. At the bottom of the flyer, someone had written in red ink, "She's not missing. She's serving dinner. You're next." I don't know what Elena Vasquez really is, or what she does to the delivery drivers who accept her invitations. All I know is that she's collecting us, one by one, turning us into permanent guests at her endless dinner party. If you work food delivery and you get an order that mentions replacing a previous driver, be very careful, ask questions, do research, and if the customer tries to get you to come inside, no matter how much money they offer, refuse. Because some customers don't just want food delivered, they want the delivery person to stay. And once you accept their invitation, you'll be serving dinner for the rest of eternity. My name is Samantha, and I've been delivering for Postmates in Austin for about 7 months now. I picked up the gig after my retail job cut my hours, and while it's not exactly stable income, it gives me the flexibility I need while I'm trying to launch my photography business. Austin's a decent city for delivery work. Lots of food trucks, late night spots, and people who understand the hustle. Most of my deliveries are pretty routine. Pick up some barbecue from East Austin, drop it off at a condo downtown, maybe chat with a customer about the weather. But there's one delivery that happened 5 weeks ago that still makes me check my locks twice before bed. and I'm starting to think it's not over yet. It was a Friday night in early November, around 11:45 p.m. I'd been having a solid evening, 8 deliveries in 6 hours, with tips that put me well ahead of my usual take. I was planning to make one more run before calling it a night when an order came through that immediately stood out. The pickup was from a place called Midnight Provisions that I'd never heard of, despite knowing most of the late-night restaurants in the city. The order was unusual, just a single item listed as special request with no other details. But the payout was $67, which was more than I usually made in 3 deliveries. The customer's name was listed as Dr. Helena Cross, and the delivery address was in Tarrytown, an upscale neighborhood west of downtown, where I'd made deliveries before. What caught my attention were the delivery instructions. Ring doorbell once and step back exactly 10 feet. Customer will retrieve item personally. Do not hand item directly to customer. Do not make eye contact. Do not speak unless spoken to. Payment already processed. I'd seen weird delivery instructions before. People with severe social anxiety. Customers who were immunocompromised. Folks who just preferred minimal interaction. But these felt different. The emphasis on not making eye contact and the specific distance requirement seemed almost ritualistic. Still, $67 for what appeared to be a simple drop-off was too good to pass up. So I accepted the order and headed to Midnight Provisions. The GPS led me to a small building in an industrial area near the airport that I'd never noticed before, despite driving through that area many times. The building looked like it had once been a medical clinic or laboratory. There were no windows, just a single steel door with a small placard that read Midnight Provisions, specialty items. The parking lot was empty except for a single black van with tinted windows. When I knocked on the door, it was answered by a woman in her 40s, wearing scrubs and latex gloves. She had short gray hair and the kind of pale complexion that suggested she didn't spend much time outdoors. "You're here for the cross delivery," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, Postmates pickup." She nodded and disappeared into the building without another word. I stood there for several minutes, listening to the hum of air conditioning units and the distant sound of planes taking off from the airport. The smell in the air was strange, antiseptic, like a hospital, but with an underlying odor I couldn't identify. When the woman returned, she was carrying a small cooler about the size of a lunchbox. It was made of white plastic and had several warning labels stuck to the sides. Fragile, temperature sensitive, and something in small print that I couldn't read in the dim light. "Handle this very carefully," she said, handing me the cooler. Dr. Cross is very particular about the condition of her deliveries. "What's in it?" I asked. The woman's expression darkened. "That's not your concern. Just follow the delivery instructions exactly, and everything will be fine." The cooler was heavier than it looked and felt cold to the touch, as if it contained dry ice or some other refrigerant. I loaded it carefully into my car and headed toward Tarrytown, wondering what kind of specialty item required such careful handling. The drive took about 25 minutes through parts of Austin that were mostly quiet at that hour. As I got closer to the delivery address, I noticed that the neighborhood was different from what I expected. Instead of the typical Tarrytown houses, large, well-maintained homes with manicured lawns, I found myself driving through an area that seemed older and more isolated. The GPS led me to a house at the end of a dead-end street that backed up to a wooded area. The house was a large Victorian-style home that looked like it had been built in the early 1900s. Unlike the other houses I'd passed, this one was completely dark, except for a single porch light that cast everything in an eerie yellow glow. I parked in the driveway and grabbed the cooler, which seemed to have gotten even colder during the drive. As I approached the front door, I could hear classical music playing inside, something slow and melancholy that seemed to drift through the walls. Following the instructions exactly, I rang the doorbell once and stepped back 10 feet. Almost immediately, I heard footsteps approaching from inside the house. They were slow and deliberate, with an odd rhythm that suggested the person might be using a cane or walker. The front door opened, and I found myself looking at a woman who appeared to be in her 60s, with long silver hair and pale skin that seemed to glow in the porch light. She was wearing a dark dress that looked like it belonged in a different era, and she moved with the careful precision of someone who was very frail or very old. "You may set the item on the porch table," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then step back to your vehicle." I placed the cooler on a small table next to the door and backed away, as instructed. Dr. Cross approached the table slowly, her movements almost ritualistic in their precision. When she picked up the cooler, she held it like it contained something precious and irreplaceable. "Thank you," she said, looking directly at me despite the instructions about eye contact. "You've been very helpful." Her eyes were the most unsettling thing about her. They were pale blue, almost colorless, and they seemed to look right through me as if I wasn't really there. But there was something else in her gaze, a hunger that made my skin crawl. "Have a good evening," I said, turning to walk back to my car. "Wait," Dr. Cross called out. "I have another delivery request. Would you be interested in some additional work?" I turned back, curious despite my unease. "What kind of delivery?" "Similar to this one, same pickup location, same careful handling required. The pay would be substantial." "How substantial?" $200, cash. $200 was more than I usually made in an entire night. It was enough to cover my rent for the week and still have money left over for groceries. "When?" I asked. "Tomorrow night. Same time. Are you interested?" Every instinct I had told me to decline, but the money was too tempting. "Yeah, I can do that." Dr. Cross smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too white and too sharp. "Excellent. I'll make the arrangements." As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I just agreed to something much more significant than a simple delivery. But $200 was $200, and I needed the money. The next night, I returned to Midnight Provisions at the appointed time. The same woman in scrubs answered the door, but this time, she seemed nervous, constantly glancing over her shoulder as if she was afraid of being overheard. "You're back," she said, handing me another cooler identical to the first one. "I have to ask, did Dr. Cross say anything unusual to you last night?" "She offered me another delivery job." "Why?" The woman's face went pale. "You need to be very careful. Dr. Cross isn't like other customers. She has specific interests." "What do you mean?" "Just follow the instructions exactly. Don't deviate, and whatever you do, don't accept any invitations to come inside her house." Before I could ask more questions, she closed the door, leaving me standing in the parking lot with another mysterious cooler and a growing sense of unease. The second delivery went exactly like the first. Dr. Cross met me at the door, took the cooler with the same ritualistic precision, and thanked me for my service. But this time, when I turned to leave, she called out again. "Samantha, would you like to see what you've been delivering?" I froze. I hadn't told her my name, and it wasn't displayed anywhere she could have seen it. "How do you know my name?" "I make it my business to know about the people who help me. You're very reliable, very professional. I appreciate that." "I should go. I have other deliveries. Just for a moment, I think you'd find it educational." There was something in her voice that made it hard to refuse. Despite every warning bell going off in my head, I found myself walking back toward the house. "I really can't stay long," I said. "Of course, just a quick look." Dr. Cross led me through the front door into a foyer that was decorated with antique furniture and paintings that looked like they belonged in a museum. The house smelled like old books and something else. Something medicinal and slightly sweet. "This way," she said, leading me down a hallway lined with more paintings. But as we walked, I noticed that the paintings weren't landscapes or portraits like I'd initially thought. They were anatomical drawings, detailed illustrations of human organs, skeletal systems, and surgical procedures. "Are you a doctor?" I asked. "I was, once upon a time. Now I pursue more specialized research." She led me to a room that had been converted into what looked like a laboratory. The walls were lined with glass cabinets filled with specimens floating in clear liquid. Some of them looked like organs or tissue samples, but others were harder to identify. "What kind of research?" I asked, though I was starting to suspect I didn't want to know the answer. "Preservation. The human body is such a fragile thing, don't you think? So temporary, so prone to decay. I'm working on ways to extend that temporary nature." She walked over to one of the cabinets and gestured toward a specimen that made my stomach turn. It looked like a human heart, but it was still beating, pulsing rhythmically in its glass container. This belonged to a delivery driver, actually. A young man named Marcus, who used to bring me my supplies. He was very dedicated to his work, just like you. I backed toward the door, my heart pounding. "I need to leave." "But you haven't seen the best part yet," Dr. Cross said, moving to block my path. "I've been collecting specimens from delivery drivers for months now. They're perfect subjects. Young, healthy, accustomed to following instructions precisely." "You're insane." "I'm a scientist, and you, Samantha, would make an excellent addition to my collection." I pushed past her and ran for the front door, but it was locked. I could hear Dr. Cross behind me, moving with that same slow, deliberate pace, as if she knew I couldn't escape. "There's no need to run, Samantha. The process is quite painless, and you'll be contributing to important research." I found a window in the living room and smashed it with a lamp, cutting my hands on the glass as I climbed through. I ran to my car and drove away as fast as I could, not stopping until I was back in familiar parts of Austin. The next day, I tried to report what I'd seen to the police, but when I gave them the address, they couldn't find any record of Dr. Helena Cross, or the house where I'd made the deliveries. According to their maps, the street I'd driven down didn't exist. I also tried to find Midnight Provisions again, but the building was empty, with no sign that a business had ever operated there. 2 weeks later, I started getting orders from Midnight Provisions again. Always the same pickup location, always for Dr. Cross, always with payouts that increased each time I declined them. The most recent offer was for $500, more than I usually made in a week, but I also started noticing other things. Missing person flyers around the city featuring delivery drivers who had disappeared. A news story about a Postmates driver named Marcus who had vanished without a trace. Social media posts from families looking for loved ones who worked for various delivery services. Last week I found something that confirmed my worst fears. Taped to my car windshield was a medical diagram showing the human circulatory system. At the bottom, written in precise handwriting, was a note. "Your specimen would be particularly valuable. The collection is incomplete without you. I've stopped working for Postmates. I've moved to a different apartment. I've changed my phone number. But somehow, the orders keep finding me, appearing on apps I've never signed up for, with payouts that get higher every time. And sometimes, late at night, I see a familiar black van parked outside my building. I know Dr. Cross is inside, waiting for me to accept her invitation to complete the collection. If you work food delivery and you get an order for specialty items with unusual handling instructions, decline it immediately. If a customer knows your name without you telling them, leave. And if anyone ever invites you to see their research, run as fast as you can. Because some customers aren't ordering food, they're ordering specimens. And once you're part of their collection, you'll never deliver anything again." My name is Jordan, and I've been delivering for Uber Eats in Portland for about 11 months now. I started doing it after getting laid off from my office job. And while it's not exactly what I planned for my career, It pays the bills while I figure out my next move. Portland's a solid city for delivery work. Lots of food carts, late-night restaurants, and people who tip decently if you're polite and punctual. Most of my deliveries are straightforward. Pick up some ramen from Hawthorne, drop it off at a Pearl District loft, maybe exchange small talk with a customer about the weather. I've developed a routine that keeps me efficient and safe. But there's one delivery that happened 7 weeks ago that shattered everything I thought I knew about this job. And I'm starting to realize it was never really about the food at all. It started on a Wednesday night in mid-October, around 10:20 p.m. I'd been having a decent evening. 6 deliveries in 4 hours, with tips that put me slightly ahead of my usual pace. I was considering making one more run before heading home when an order appeared that immediately caught my attention. The pickup was from a Vietnamese restaurant called Pho Saigon that I delivered from many times before. The order was standard, spring rolls, PLO, and some rice dishes totaling about $34. But the payout was unusually high at $48, and the delivery address was in the Alberta Arts District, an area I knew well. The customer's name was listed as Michael Chen, and the delivery instructions seemed normal at first glance. Apartment 3B, ring buzzer, and wait for response. Customer prefers contactless delivery. Nothing unusual there. Lots of people had switched to contactless during the pandemic and never switched back. But there was an additional note that I almost missed. Please take photo of food placement and send directly to customer at 503-555-0847 before leaving. Standard app photo not sufficient. I found it odd that a customer would want a separate photo sent to their phone, but some people were particular about documentation for expense reports or dietary tracking. The extra step seemed harmless enough, so I accepted the order. The pickup at Pho Saigon went smoothly. The restaurant was busy with the usual dinner crowd, and the staff had the order ready within 5 minutes. As I loaded the food into my insulated bag, I noticed one of the kitchen workers watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away and busied himself with cleaning. The drive to the Alberta Arts District took about 15 minutes through familiar streets lined with galleries, coffee shops, and the kind of trendy restaurants that made Portland famous. The delivery address was a converted warehouse that had been turned into loft apartments, the kind of building that attracted young professionals and artists. I found apartment 3B on the 3rd floor and rang the buzzer as instructed. A voice came through the intercom almost immediately, as if the person had been waiting right by the door. "Just leave it outside the door, please. I'll get it in a few minutes." The voice was male, probably middle-aged, with a slight accent I couldn't place. Nothing unusual about the request. Contactless delivery was still common, especially late at night. I set the food bag down outside the apartment door and took the standard photo through the Uber Eats app. Then I pulled out my personal phone to take the additional photo the customer had requested. As I was framing the shot, I noticed something odd. The apartment door had a peephole, and I could see a faint light coming from the other side, as if someone was looking through it. But that wasn't what bothered me. It was the fact that the light seemed to be moving, like someone was adjusting their position to get a better view. I took the photo and sent it to the number the customer had provided, along with a brief message. "Your order has been delivered. Enjoy your meal." The response came back within seconds. "Thank you, Jordan. You're very photogenic." I stared at my phone, confused. The customer had used my name, which was possible since it appeared in the app, but the comment about being photogenic was strange. How could he know what I looked like? I was wearing a mask, and the photo I'd taken was focused on the food, not me. I decided to ignore the weird comment and headed back to my car. As I walked down the hallway, I had the distinct feeling that I was being watched. I glanced back at apartment 3B and saw that the peephole was dark now, but I could swear I heard movement inside. The next few days passed normally. I made my usual deliveries, earned decent tips, and tried to forget about the strange interaction with Michael Chen. But 3 nights later, I got another order from Pho Saigon for the same customer at the same address. This time the order was larger, about $67 worth of food, and the payout was even higher at $73. The delivery instructions were identical, including the request for a separate photo. Despite my unease about the previous delivery, the money was too good to pass up. The pickup went smoothly again, but this time I noticed that the same kitchen worker was watching me even more intently. When I made eye contact with him, he approached the counter. "You delivering to Michael Chen again?" he asked in accented English. "Yeah. Why?" He glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. "Be careful with that guy. He orders a lot, but something not right about him." "What do you mean?" "He asked too many questions about the drivers. Wants to know names, schedules, where you live. We don't tell him nothings, but he keeps asking." A chill ran down my spine. "How long has he been ordering from here?" "Maybe 6 months. Always the same apartment. Always wants photos. But here's the weird thing. We never see him eat the food." "What do you mean?" "My cousin lives in that building. Says the guy orders food every few days, but the dumpster behind the building is always full of unopened takeout containers, like he's not ordering to eat." I thanked the worker for the warning and headed to the delivery, but his words echoed in my mind. Why would someone order food they didn't plan to eat? And why was he so interested in the delivery drivers? The second delivery to apartment 3B went exactly like the first. I rang the buzzer, left the food outside the door, and took both photos as requested. But this time, when I sent the separate photo to Michael's number, his response was even more unsettling. "Excellent work, Jordan. You're very reliable. I've been watching your delivery patterns, and you're quite efficient." I stared at the message, my hands shaking slightly. How could he know about my delivery patterns, and what did he mean by watching? I decided to test something. Instead of leaving immediately after taking the photos, I walked to the stairwell and waited. After about 2 minutes, I heard the apartment door open. I crept back down the hallway and peered around the corner. Michael Chen was standing in his doorway, but he wasn't collecting the food. Instead, he was holding a professional-looking camera with a long lens, and he was taking pictures of the empty hallway where I had been standing just moments before. He was tall and thin, probably in his 40s, with dark hair and pale skin. He was wearing all black clothing and moved with the careful precision of someone who was used to not being noticed. After taking several photos, he collected the food and went back inside. I waited another few minutes, then quietly made my way back to my car. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that Michael Chen wasn't interested in the food at all. He was collecting something else, information about me. Over the next 2 weeks, I started paying closer attention to my surroundings during deliveries. I began noticing things I'd missed before. The same dark sedan, parked on different streets where I was making deliveries, a figure with a camera, watching from windows or doorways. The feeling of being followed that I'd previously attributed to paranoia. I also started getting orders from Michael Chen more frequently, sometimes twice a week, always from Faux Saigon, always with the same unusual photo requirements. Each time, his text responses became more personal and more unsettling. "You look tired tonight, Jordan. Are you getting enough sleep? I noticed you changed your route to avoid 82nd Avenue. Smart thinking. Your car needs new tires. The front left one is getting worn." The last message made my blood run cold. How could he possibly know about my tires unless he'd been close enough to my car to examine them? I started parking in different locations and taking circuitous routes to deliveries, but somehow he always seemed to know where I'd been. 3 weeks ago, I decided to confront the situation directly. When I got another order from Michael Chen, I accepted it but made a plan. Instead of leaving immediately after the delivery, I was going to wait and see what he was really doing. The pickup at Faux Saigon went normally, though the kitchen worker who'd warned me before gave me a concerned look. "You still delivering to that guy?" he asked. "Yeah, but this is the last time." "Good. My cousin says he's been asking the building manager about you. Wants to know your full name, your schedule, personal information. Manager told him to mind his own business, but the guy is persistent. I thanked him and headed to the delivery with a growing sense of dread. When I arrived at the apartment building, I noticed the same dark sedan parked across the street. The windows were tinted, but I could see the outline of someone sitting in the driver's seat. I made the delivery as usual, but instead of leaving, I hid in the stairwell and waited. After a few minutes, Michael emerged from his apartment with his camera. But this time, he wasn't alone. There was another man with him, shorter and stockier, also carrying camera equipment. They were talking in low voices, and I caught fragments of their conversation. Been tracking this one for 3 weeks. Good candidate for the project. Need more personal information before we proceed. They spent several minutes photographing the hallway and the area around the door where I'd left the food. Then they went back inside, and I heard the sound of computer keyboards and what sounded like a printer running. I waited another 10 minutes, then crept down the hallway and listened at Michael's door. I could hear voices inside and what sounded like a slideshow presentation. I caught words like target, surveillance, and acquisition. That's when I realized that Michael Chen wasn't just a weird customer with unusual photo requests. He was part of something much larger and more dangerous. The food deliveries were just a cover for surveillance operations, and I was the target. I left the building as quietly as possible and drove straight home, checking my mirrors constantly to make sure I wasn't being followed. But when I arrived at my apartment, I found something that made my worst fears seem real. Taped to my door was a manila envelope with my name written on it in block letters. Inside were dozens of photographs. Pictures of me making deliveries, walking to my car, entering my apartment building, even sleeping in my bedroom with the curtains partially open. At the bottom of the stack was a note written in the same block letters. Jordan, you have been selected for phase 2 of our project. Report to apartment 3B tomorrow at 11 p.m. for briefing. Do not involve law enforcement. We know where you live, where you work, and where your family lives. Compliance is not optional. I called the police immediately, but when they went to investigate apartment 3B, they found it empty. According to the building manager, no one named Michael Chen had ever lived there. The apartment had been vacant for months. The police took the photographs as evidence, but they couldn't trace them to any specific source. The paper was generic, the printing was done on a common inkjet printer, and there were no fingerprints or other identifying marks. Since then, I've stopped working for Uber Eats. I've moved to a different apartment across town. I've changed my phone number and deleted all my social media accounts. But somehow, the surveillance continues. I still get text messages from unknown numbers, with photos of me going about my daily life. I still see the dark sedan parked near my new apartment. And last week I found another envelope taped to my door with a single photograph inside, a picture of me reading the previous note, taken from inside my old apartment. At the bottom of the photo was a new message. You can't hide from us, Jordan. Phase 2 will proceed as scheduled. We'll be in touch. I don't know who Michael Chen really is, or what Phase 2 involves, or why I was selected for their project. All I know is that what started as a simple food delivery job has turned into a nightmare of surveillance and threats that I can't escape. If you work food delivery and a customer asks for unusual photo requirements, be very careful. If they know details about your life that they shouldn't know, stop delivering to them immediately. And if you ever feel like you're being watched or followed, trust your instincts. Because some customers aren't ordering food. They're ordering information about you. And once you're in their system, they'll never stop watching. My name is Rachel, and I've been delivering for DoorDash in Nashville for about 13 months now. I started doing it after my band broke up, and I needed something flexible while I figured out my next move in the music industry. Nashville is a great city for delivery work. Lots of late night spots, tourists who tip well, and musicians who understand the hustle of gig work. Most of my deliveries are routine. Pick up some hot chicken from Prince's, drop it off at a hotel downtown, maybe chat with a customer about the local music scene. I've gotten to know this city pretty well through this job, including some of the more unusual neighborhoods that tourists never see. But there's one delivery that happened 9 weeks ago that made me realize some hungers can't be satisfied with food. It was a Thursday night in early September, around 12:30 a.m. I'd been having a slow evening, only 5 deliveries in 6 hours, barely enough to cover gas and make it worthwhile. I was about to call it quits when an order came through that immediately stood out from the usual late night requests. The pickup was from a place called Nourishment that I'd never heard of, despite knowing most of the restaurants that stayed open past midnight. The order was strange. No specific food items listed, just custom meal preparation, dietary restrictions with a total of $156. The payout was $89, which was more than I usually made in an entire night. The customer's name was listed as Mrs. Holloway, and the delivery address was in Belle Mead, an affluent neighborhood where I'd made deliveries to mansion-sized houses before. What caught my attention were the delivery instructions. Customer has severe medical condition requiring specialized nutrition. Handle with extreme care. Ring doorbell and wait for personal collection. Do not leave unattended. Time sensitive, must arrive before 1 a.m. The urgency and medical nature of the request made me feel like I was doing something important, almost like a medical courier rather than a food delivery driver. The high payout suggested this was a regular customer who valued reliable service, so I accepted the order immediately. The pickup location led me to an area of Nashville I'd never been to before, despite living here for over 2 years. It was an industrial district near the river, full of warehouses and processing plants that were mostly closed at night. I drove for about 15 minutes through increasingly empty streets before finding the address. Nourishment was housed in a converted warehouse with no visible signage except for a small placard next to a steel door. The building was dark except for a single light over the entrance, and there were no other cars in the parking lot. The whole area felt abandoned, which seemed odd for a business that was apparently operating at 12:45 a.m. When I knocked on the door, it was answered by a woman in her 30s wearing what looked like medical scrubs. She had short blonde hair and the kind of pale complexion that suggested she worked night shifts regularly. Her hands were covered with latex gloves, and she smelled faintly of disinfectant. "You're here for the Holloway delivery," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, DoorDash pickup." She nodded and disappeared into the building without another word. I stood there for several minutes, listening to the sound of industrial equipment humming in the distance and the occasional splash from the nearby river. The smell in the air was strange, antiseptic mixed with something organic that I couldn't identify. When she returned, she was carrying a large, insulated container that looked more like medical equipment than a food delivery bag. It was white plastic, with several warning labels, and what appeared to be a temperature gauge on the side. "This must be delivered within 15 minutes, she said, handing me the container. "Mrs. Holloway's condition is very serious. Any delay could be problematic." "What kind of condition?" I asked. The woman's expression darkened. "That's not your concern. Just follow the delivery instructions exactly, and everything will be fine." The container was heavier than I expected, and felt cold to the touch, as if it contained dry ice or some other refrigerant. I loaded it carefully into my car and headed toward Belle Mead, wondering what kind of medical condition required such specialized food preparation at nearly 1 a.m. The drive took about 12 minutes through quiet residential streets, lined with the kind of houses that appeared in Southern Living magazine. As I got closer to the delivery address, I noticed that this part of Belle Mead was different from the areas I delivered to before. The houses were older, larger, and set back from the road behind tall gates and mature trees. The GPS led me to a mansion at the end of a private drive that wound through what looked like a small forest. The house was enormous, probably built in the 1920s or 30s, with Gothic Revival architecture that made it look more like a cathedral than a residence. Most of the windows were dark, but I could see lights on in what appeared to be the ground floor. I parked in the circular driveway and grabbed the insulated container, which seemed to have gotten even colder during the drive. As I approached the front door, I could hear classical music playing inside. Something slow and haunting that seemed to drift through the walls. I rang the doorbell and waited, checking my phone to make sure I was still within the 15-minute deadline. After about 30 seconds, I heard footsteps approaching from inside the house. They were slow and deliberate, with an odd rhythm that suggested the person might be using a walking aid. The front door opened, and I found myself looking at a woman who appeared to be in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and pale skin that seemed almost translucent in the porch light. She was wearing a dark dress that looked expensive but outdated, like something from several decades ago. "You must be Rachel," she said, her voice cultured but weak, as if speaking required great effort. "Thank you for coming so late. I know it's an unusual request." "No problem, Mrs. Holloway. I have your delivery here." She looked at the insulated container with an expression I couldn't quite read. Relief mixed with something that looked almost like hunger. "Excellent. Please, bring it inside. I need to verify the contents immediately." "I'm sorry, but I'm supposed to hand it to you directly. Company policy." Mrs. Holloway's expression changed, becoming more urgent. "You don't understand. This isn't ordinary food. It requires immediate refrigeration and careful handling. If it's not processed correctly within the next few minutes, it will be ruined." There was something in her voice that made it hard to refuse. She seemed genuinely distressed, and the medical nature of the delivery made me feel like I might be putting her health at risk by following standard procedures. "Just for a moment," I said, following her into the house. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior. The foyer was dominated by a grand staircase with an ornate banister, and the walls were lined with oil paintings that looked like they belonged in a museum. The house smelled like old money and something else. Something medicinal and slightly sweet. Mrs. Holloway led me through several rooms toward what appeared to be the back of the house. As we walked, I noticed that all the furniture was covered with white sheets, as if the house was being prepared for long-term storage. The only sounds were our footsteps on the hardwood floors and that haunting classical music. "This way," she said, leading me into what looked like a kitchen, though it was unlike any kitchen I'd ever seen. The room was filled with medical equipment, refrigeration units, centrifuges, and machines I didn't recognize. The walls were lined with glass cabinets containing various instruments and what appeared to be medical supplies. "Are you a doctor?" I asked. "I was once upon a time. Now I have different nutritional requirements." She took the insulated container from my hands and opened it carefully. Inside were several smaller containers filled with what looked like dark red liquid. The smell that emerged was metallic and organic, like copper mixed with something I couldn't identify. "Perfect," she said, her voice filled with relief. "The temperature is exactly right." As she began transferring the containers to one of the refrigeration units, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The liquid in the containers wasn't just dark red. It was moving slightly, as if it was still warm, and the smell was becoming stronger, more recognizable. It smelled like blood. "What is that?" I asked, backing toward the door. Mrs. Holloway turned to face me, and I saw that her appearance had changed. Her pale skin now had a slight flush to it, and her eyes seemed brighter, more alert. "It's my medicine, dear. I have a very rare condition that requires specialized nutrition." "That's blood." "Yes, it is. I have a condition called porphyria, a genetic disorder that affects the production of heme in the blood. Without regular transfusions of fresh blood, I become very ill." I'd heard of porphyria before, but I was pretty sure it didn't require drinking blood. "I need to leave. But you've been so helpful, Rachel, and I'm still so very hungry." The way she said hungry made my skin crawl. There was something predatory in her voice that hadn't been there before. I turned toward the door, but Mrs. Holloway moved faster than I would have thought possible for someone her age. "You can't leave yet, dear. You see, the delivery isn't complete. I ordered enough for 2. I don't know what you're talking about. The woman at Nourishment, she told me you were perfect, young, healthy, the right blood type. She's been testing delivery drivers for months, looking for suitable candidates." I realized with horror that the woman in scrubs hadn't been preparing food at all. She'd been evaluating me, probably taking samples somehow, maybe from the door handle or the container I'd carried. The whole delivery was a setup. "You're insane," I said, pushing past her toward the door. But the door was locked, and I could hear Mrs. Holloway behind me, moving with that same impossible speed. "There's no need to be afraid, Rachel. The process is quite painless, and you'll be helping someone with a very serious medical condition." I found a window in the dining room and smashed it with a chair, cutting my hands on the glass as I climbed through. I could hear Mrs. Holloway calling after me, but her voice was different now. Deeper, more guttural, like an animal growling. I ran to my car and drove away as fast as I could, not stopping until I was back in familiar parts of Nashville. My hands were bleeding from the broken glass, and I was shaking uncontrollably. The next day, I tried to report what I'd seen to the police, but when I gave them the address in Belmead, they couldn't find any record of a Mrs. Holloway living there. According to their records, the house had been empty for years, tied up in a complicated estate dispute. I also tried to find Nourishment again, but the warehouse was empty, with no sign that a business had ever operated there. 2 weeks later, I started getting orders from Nourishment again. Always the same pickup location, always from Mrs. Holloway, always with payouts that increased each time I declined them. The most recent offer was for $247, more than I usually made in 2 nights. But I also started noticing other things. Missing person reports for delivery drivers who had disappeared after taking late night orders. News stories about people found in remote areas, drained of blood, but with no obvious cause of death. Social media posts from families looking for loved ones who worked for various delivery services. Last week I found something that confirmed my worst fears. Taped to my car windshield was a medical report with my name on it. It showed blood test results that I'd never authorized, including my blood type, iron levels, and other information that someone would need to determine if I was a suitable donor. At the bottom of the report, someone had written in red ink, "Type O negative, excellent candidate, collection scheduled soon." I've stopped working for DoorDash. I've moved to a different apartment. I've changed my phone number. But somehow, the orders keep finding me, appearing on apps I've never signed up for, with payouts that get higher every time. And sometimes, late at night, I see a familiar dark car parked outside my building. I know Mrs. Holloway is inside, waiting for me to accept her invitation to complete the delivery. If you work food delivery and you get an order for specialized nutrition or dietary restrictions with unusually high payouts, be very careful. If the pickup location looks more like a medical facility than a restaurant, decline the order. And if a customer ever invites you inside to verify the contents, run. Because some customers aren't ordering food, they're ordering fresh blood. And once you're on their menu, you'll never be safe again. My name is Blake, and I've been delivering for Grubhub in Chicago for about 9 months now. I picked up the gig after my construction job ended for the winter, and while it's not exactly steady work, it keeps me busy during the cold months when outdoor work is scarce. Chicago is a challenging city for delivery work, brutal winters, confusing street layouts, and customers who sometimes don't tip well. But I've learned to navigate it efficiently. Most of my deliveries are predictable. Pick up some deep dish from Lou Malnati's, drop it off at a Lincoln Park high-rise, maybe exchange a few words about the Bears with a customer. I've developed routes that help me avoid the worst traffic in neighborhoods that make me uncomfortable. But there's one delivery that happened 12 weeks ago that made me question everything I thought I knew about this city. and I'm starting to think it was never really about delivering food at all. It was a Saturday night in late August, around 11:15 p.m. I'd been having a decent evening, 7 deliveries in 5 hours, with tips that put me ahead of my usual weekend take. I was planning to make one more run before heading home when an order appeared that immediately seemed different from the typical late-night requests. The pickup was from a place called Second Helpings that I'd never heard of, despite knowing most of the restaurants that stayed open past 11 p.m. The order was substantial, $78 worth of what appeared to be comfort food: meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and apple pie. The payout was $56, which was excellent for a single delivery. The customer's name was listed as David Morrison, and the delivery address was in Uptown, a neighborhood I delivered to many times before. What caught my attention were the delivery instructions. Customer is hearing impaired. Ring doorbell firmly 3 times and wait. If no answer, call the number provided and let it ring exactly 7 times, then hang up and try doorbell again. Customer appreciates patience. I delivered to hearing impaired customers before, and the instructions seemed reasonable. Maybe the customer relied on vibrating alerts or visual cues that took time to notice. The detailed protocol suggested someone who had worked out a system that functioned well for them. The pickup location led me to a part of Chicago I rarely visited, an older commercial district near the lake that seemed to be in transition between industrial and residential use. I drove for about 20 minutes through streets lined with converted warehouses and buildings that looked like they'd been repurposed multiple times over the decades. Second Helpings was located in what appeared to be a former diner, with the classic stainless steel exterior and neon signage that had been partially restored. The sign in the window read, "Open late, comfort food specialists," and I could see warm light glowing through the windows, though I couldn't make out any customers inside. When I entered, the smell of home cooking hit me immediately. Roasted meat, fresh bread, and something that reminded me of my grandmother's kitchen. The interior had been updated but maintained the classic diner aesthetic, with red vinyl booths and a long counter with chrome stools. Behind the counter stood a man who appeared to be in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd been working in kitchens for decades. He was wearing a white apron over casual clothes and smiled warmly when he saw me. "You must be Blake," he said. "I'm Frank. Thanks for taking the Morrison delivery." "No problem. Is the order ready?" "Just finished packing it up." He handed me a large, insulated bag that felt heavier than typical takeout. "David's a regular customer. Been ordering from us for about 6 months now. Real nice guy. Just has some challenges with communication." The instructions mentioned he's hearing impaired. Frank's expression shifted slightly, becoming more serious. "Yeah, among other things. He's been through a lot. Lost his family in an accident a few years back, and it left him pretty isolated. These deliveries are probably the only human contact he gets most days." The way Frank said it made me feel like I was doing something important, almost like a social service, rather than just dropping off food. "I'll make sure to be patient with the delivery." "I appreciate that. And Blake? If he seems a little off, don't take it personally. Sometimes grief changes people in ways that are hard to understand." I thanked Frank and headed to my car, wondering what he meant by off. The drive to Uptown took about 25 minutes through neighborhoods that gradually shifted from commercial to residential. As I got closer to the delivery address, I noticed that this part of Uptown was quieter than usual, with fewer people on the streets, despite it being a Saturday night. The GPS led me to a 3-story brownstone on a tree-lined street that looked like it had been built in the early 1900s. The building was well maintained, but had an oddly isolated feel, as if it existed in a pocket of silence, despite being in the middle of the city. Most of the windows were dark, but I could see a faint light in what appeared to be a second-floor apartment. I found the entrance to the building and located the buzzer for apartment 2B, which matched the delivery instructions. Following the protocol exactly, I pressed the buzzer firmly 3 times and waited. The sound echoed in the small entryway, but there was no response. After about 2 minutes, I pulled out my phone and called the numbers provided in the delivery instructions. I let it ring exactly 7 times, counting carefully, then hung up as instructed. I waited another minute, then tried the buzzer again. This time, I heard footsteps on the stairs inside the building. They were slow and deliberate, with an odd rhythm that suggested the person might be having difficulty walking. After about a minute, the front door opened, and I found myself looking at a man who appeared to be in his 40s. David Morrison was tall and thin, with dark hair that looked like it hadn't been cut in months, and pale skin that suggested he didn't spend much time outdoors. He was wearing a bathrobe over what looked like pajamas, and his eyes had the kind of hollow look that comes from chronic insomnia or deep depression. "You're Blake," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for being so patient with the buzzer system." "No problem at all. I have your order from Second Helpings." He looked at the insulated bag with an expression I couldn't quite read. Relief mixed with something that looked almost like hunger. "Excellent. Frank makes the best comfort food in the city. It reminds me of better times." As I handed him the bag, I noticed that his hands were shaking slightly, and his grip was weaker than I expected. "Are you feeling all right, Mr. Morrison?" "I'm fine, just tired. I don't sleep well anymore." He paused, looking at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "You know, you look familiar. Have we met before?" "I don't think so. This is my first delivery to this address." You remind me of someone I used to know. Someone who was very important to me." The way he said it made my skin crawl, but I attributed it to the grief that Frank had mentioned. "Well, I hope you enjoy your dinner. Would you like to come in for a moment? I don't get many visitors, and it would be nice to have some company." Every instinct I had told me to decline politely and leave, but there was something in his voice that made me hesitate. He seemed genuinely lonely, and Frank had mentioned that these deliveries might be his only human contact. I really should get going. I have other deliveries waiting. "Of course, I understand." His expression fell, and he looked even more isolated than before. "Thank you for the food, Blake. You're very kind, just like..." He trailed off, staring at me with that same unsettling intensity. "Just like who?" I asked. "My son. You're about the same age he would have been now. Same build, same hair color. Sometimes when I'm not thinking clearly, I almost imagine..." He shook his head, as if clearing away unwanted thoughts. "I'm sorry. Grief makes you say strange things sometimes." I felt a wave of sympathy for him. Losing a child was something I couldn't imagine, and it explained the hollow look in his eyes, and the isolated way he lived. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Morrison." "Thank you. That means more than you know." As I walked back to my car, I could feel him watching me from the doorway. When I reached the street and looked back, he was still standing there, silhouetted against the light from the hallway. The next week, I got another order from Second Helpings for David Morrison. Same type of food, same delivery instructions, same high payout. When I arrived at the brownstone, the delivery went exactly like the first one. Patient buzzer protocol, David answering in his bathrobe. The same comments about how I reminded him of someone. But this time, when he invited me in, I noticed something that made me uneasy. Through the open door, I could see into his apartment, and the walls were covered with photographs. From what I could see, they all appeared to be pictures of the same young man. Someone who did, in fact, look remarkably similar to me. "Your son?" I asked, nodding toward the photos. "Yes, Michael. He was 23 when the accident happened. Such a bright future ahead of him." I looked more closely at the photos, and the resemblance was unsettling. The young man in the pictures could have been my brother, Same height, same build, same dark hair, and facial structure. He looks like a good kid. He was studying to be a teacher, wanted to work with children. He had such a kind heart, always helping others. David paused, staring at me with that intense look again. You have the same kind eyes he had. I thanked him and left, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the resemblance between me and his son was more than just coincidence. Over the next few weeks, I started getting orders from David Morrison more frequently, sometimes twice a week, always with the same high payouts. Each delivery was similar to the previous ones, but I began noticing small changes in David's behavior. He started asking more personal questions about my life, my family, my plans for the future. He wanted to know where I lived, what I did when I wasn't working, whether I had a girlfriend. "You remind me so much of Michael," he would say. "Sometimes I forget that you're not him." The comments became more frequent and more unsettling. He started calling me by his son's name, then correcting himself with an embarrassed laugh. He began asking me to stay longer, offering to pay me extra just to sit and talk for a few minutes. "I know it's strange," he said during one delivery, "but talking to you makes me feel like Michael is still here somehow, like he's just visiting for dinner." I started declining his invitations to come inside, but he would stand in the doorway talking for longer and longer periods, as if he was reluctant to let me leave. Sometimes I would catch him staring at me with an expression that was more than just grief. It was obsession. 3 weeks ago, things escalated in a way that made me realize David Morrison's interest in me wasn't just about resembling his dead son. I arrived for what I thought would be a routine delivery, but when David answered the door, he was dressed differently. Instead of his usual bathrobe and pajamas, he was wearing a suit and tie, as if he was expecting a special guest. "Michael," he said, his face lighting up with genuine joy. "You're finally home." "Mr. Morrison, it's Blake. I have your food delivery." His expression faltered for a moment, then returned to that unsettling intensity. "Of course. Blake. I'm sorry, sometimes I get confused." He paused, looking at me carefully. "But you could be Michael. You're exactly the right age now, exactly the right look. If you just stayed for dinner, if you just let me pretend for a little while. I really need to go." "Please," he said, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "Just for an hour. I've prepared Michael's favorite meal. Set the table the way he liked it. You could sit in his chair, use his dishes. It would mean everything to me." I could see past him into the apartment now, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The dining room table was set for two, with candles lit and what appeared to be a family photo propped up next to one of the place settings. But the photo wasn't of David and his son. It was a picture of David and me, taken from a distance, as if someone had been following me and photographing me without my knowledge. "Where did you get that photo?" David's expression changed, becoming more calculating. "I've been watching you, Blake, learning about your routines, your habits. You're so much like Michael that sometimes I think maybe you could just stay. Maybe you could be my son." I backed away from the door, but David followed me onto the front steps. "You don't understand," he said, his voice becoming more agitated. "Michael was everything to me. When he died, I died too. But then you started delivering food, and I realized that maybe I could have him back. Maybe I could have a son again. You need help, Mr. Morrison. Professional help." "I don't need help. I need Michael, and you're going to be Michael." I ran to my car and drove away as fast as I could, but in my rearview mirror, I could see David standing in the street, calling after me. "Michael, come back. Dinner's getting cold." Since then, I've stopped accepting orders from second helpings, but David Morrison has found other ways to contact me. I get orders from different restaurants, always with his name, always with payouts that increase each time I decline them. The most recent offer was for $156, more than I usually make in an entire night. I've also started noticing that I'm being followed. The same dark sedan appears near my apartment, at restaurants where I pick up orders, even at places I go when I'm not working. Sometimes I catch glimpses of David Morrison watching me from a distance, always with that same obsessive stare. Last week I found something that made me realize the situation was even worse than I thought. Taped to my apartment door was a birthday card addressed to Michael Morrison. Inside was a handwritten note. "Happy 24th birthday, son. I've missed you so much. Come home soon. Love, Dad." Today was my 24th birthday. I don't know how David Morrison learned my real age, or how he's been tracking my movements so precisely. All I know is that a grieving father's obsession has turned me into a replacement for his dead son, and he's not going to stop until he gets what he wants. If you work food delivery and a customer starts asking too many personal questions, be very careful. If they say you remind them of someone they've lost, maintain professional boundaries. And if they ever start calling you by someone else's name, stop delivering to them immediately. Because some customers aren't just ordering food. They're trying to order back the dead. And once you become their replacement, they'll never let you go. My name is Casey, and I've been delivering for DoorDash in Las Vegas for about 14 months now. I started doing it after my casino job got cut during the pandemic. And while it's not exactly glamorous work, it pays better than most gig jobs in a city that runs on tips. Vegas is a unique place for delivery work. 24-hour restaurants, tourists who don't know the city, and locals who prefer staying inside during the brutal summer heat. Most of my deliveries are straightforward. Pick up some tacos from a food truck on the strip, drop them off at a hotel room, maybe get a decent tip from someone who's having a good night at the tables. I've learned to navigate the maze of casino layouts and apartment complexes that make up this sprawling desert city. But there's one delivery that happened 8 weeks ago that made me realize some networks in this city connect things that should never be connected. It was a Tuesday night in early October, around 1:45 a.m. I'd been having a solid evening, 9 deliveries in 7 hours, with tips that put me well ahead of my usual weeknight earnings. I was considering calling it quits when an order appeared that immediately caught my attention because of its unusual nature. The pickup was from a place called The Hub that I'd never heard of, despite knowing most of the late-night spots in the city. The order was strange. No specific food items listed, just information package, priority delivery, with a total of $0. But the payout was $127, which was more than I usually made in an entire shift. The customer's name was listed as Node 7, and the delivery address was in Henderson, a suburb southeast of Vegas that I delivered to occasionally. What made this order bizarre were the delivery instructions. Driver must have clean record and no social media presence. Delivery contains sensitive materials. Ring doorbell twice, pause 5 seconds, ring once more. Customer will verify driver identity before accepting package. Discretion essential. The mention of a clean record and sensitive materials made me think this might be some kind of legal document delivery. Maybe something related to the casinos or real estate deals that were common in Vegas. The high payout suggested it was legitimate business that required confidentiality, so I accepted the order. The pickup location led me to an office complex in an industrial area near McCarran Airport that I'd never noticed before. The buildings were modern but nondescript, the kind of place that could house anything from accounting firms to tech startups. I drove through the complex for several minutes before finding The Hub in a building that had no other visible tenants. The entrance was just a glass door with a small placard reading The Hub Information Services. Through the glass, I could see a minimalist reception area with modern furniture and several computer monitors displaying what looked like data streams or security feeds. When I pressed the buzzer, the door was answered by a woman in her 30s, wearing a business suit despite the late hour. She had short black hair and the kind of alert expression that suggested she was used to working nights. Her eyes immediately scanned me from head to toe, as if she was evaluating something. "You're Casey," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, I'm here for the Node 7 delivery. She nodded and disappeared into the building without another word. I stood there for several minutes, watching the data streams on the monitors and wondering what kind of business operated at 2 a.m. The screen showed what appeared to be maps with moving dots, lists of names and numbers, and feeds that looked like they might be from security cameras around the city. When the woman returned, she was carrying a manila envelope that was sealed with multiple pieces of tape and had several official-looking stamps on it. She also handed me a small device that looked like a GPS unit, but with additional buttons and a screen that was currently blank. "This is a tracking device," she said, her voice professional but cold. "It will guide you to the exact delivery location and confirm when the package has been successfully transferred. Do not deviate from the route it provides. Do not open the package. Do not discuss this delivery with anyone." "What kind of information service is this?" Her expression didn't change. "The kind that pays well for discretion and reliability. Follow the instructions exactly, and you'll be compensated as promised." I took the envelope and the device and headed back to my car. The envelope felt heavier than it looked and had a strange texture, as if it contained something other than papers. The tracking device activated as soon as I started my car, displaying a route that was different from what my regular GPS would have suggested. Instead of taking the direct route to Henderson, the device directed me through a series of back roads and residential areas that seemed designed to avoid main streets and traffic cameras. The route took me through parts of Vegas I'd never seen before, past industrial complexes and housing developments that all looked eerily similar. As I followed the prescribed route, I started noticing things that seemed odd. Other cars were following similar patterns, driving slowly through the same residential areas, making the same unusual turns. When I stopped at a red light, I could see that the driver in the car next to me was also holding a device similar to mine, and there was a manila envelope on his passenger seat. The tracking device led me to a house in a subdivision that looked like it had been built in the last few years. All the houses were identical. Same floor plan, same landscaping, same beige stucco exterior. The only way to tell them apart was by the house numbers, and even those seemed to follow an unusual pattern that didn't match typical street numbering. I found the address and parked in the driveway as instructed by the device. The house was dark except for a single porch light, and there were no cars visible, though the garage door was closed. Following the delivery instructions, I rang the doorbell twice, paused for 5 seconds, then rang once more. The door was answered almost immediately by a man who appeared to be in his 40s, wearing casual clothes, but with the same alert expression I'd seen at the hub. He looked at me carefully, then at the tracking device in my hand. "Casey Thompson, driver ID 4471, he said, reading from a small screen he was holding. "Package from Node 3 to Node 7. "That's right." He took the envelope and the tracking device from me, then handed me a different envelope that was identical to the first one. "This goes to Node 12. The device will update with new coordinates in 60 seconds. Before I could ask any questions, he closed the door, leaving me standing on the porch with another mysterious package. True to his word, the tracking device beeped and displayed a new route, this time leading to an address in North Las Vegas. I realized I wasn't just making a single delivery. I was part of some kind of network that moved packages between numbered locations throughout the city. The high payout was because I was essentially working as a courier for multiple stops, not just one delivery. The second delivery went exactly like the first. I followed the prescribed route to another identical house, in another subdivision, exchanged packages with another person who seemed to be expecting me, and received a third package with instructions to deliver it to Node 15. By the time I completed the fourth delivery, I was starting to understand the pattern. There were multiple nodes throughout Las Vegas, all operating at night, all connected by a network of drivers who moved packages between them. The tracking devices ensured that drivers followed specific routes and made deliveries in a precise sequence. But I was also starting to notice things that made me uncomfortable. The packages were getting heavier with each exchange, and some of them felt like they contained more than just documents. The people at each node all had the same alert, professional demeanor, as if they were part of some kind of organization. And the routes I was following seemed designed to avoid any area where there might be police or security cameras. The fifth delivery took me to a location that wasn't a house at all, but a warehouse in an industrial area near the airport. The building had no visible signage, just a number painted on a steel door. When I made the delivery, the person who answered was wearing the same type of business suit I'd seen at the hub. "Final delivery," he said, taking the package and the tracking device. "Your compensation has been processed." What was I delivering? I asked. His expression didn't change. "Information, data that needs to move through secure channels without leaving digital traces." What kind of data? The kind that certain people pay well to obtain and other people pay well to protect. You've been very helpful in facilitating that exchange. As I drove home, I checked my DoorDash account and found that the $127 had been deposited as promised. But I also found something else. A message from an unknown sender that simply read, "Excellent work. Additional opportunities available for reliable drivers. Respond if interested." Over the next few days, I tried to research the hub and the network I'd apparently become part of. I couldn't find any legitimate business listings for the hub or information services at the address where I'd picked up the first package. The subdivisions where I'd made deliveries all appeared to be owned by shell companies with no clear connection to any real business. I also started noticing things around the city that I'd missed before. Late at night, I would see other delivery drivers following unusual routes, carrying packages that didn't look like food, making stops at locations that weren't restaurants or residences. It was as if there was an entire shadow economy operating parallel to the legitimate delivery services. 2 weeks later, I got another order from the hub. Same type of package, same network of nodes, same high payout. This time, the compensation was $156, and the message afterward offered even more opportunities for specialized deliveries. I declined, but the offers kept coming. Different pickup locations, different node numbers, but always the same pattern. Packages that needed to move through the city without leaving digital traces, always at night, always with payouts that were too good to refuse. Last week, I decided to investigate one of the node locations during daylight hours. I drove to the house in Henderson, where I'd made my first delivery, but what I found made my blood run cold. The house was empty, with a "for sale" sign in the yard. According to the real estate listing, it had been vacant for months. I checked 2 other node locations and found the same thing: empty houses, vacant lots, or buildings that showed no signs of recent activity. It was as if the entire network I'd been part of existed only at night, vanishing during daylight hours like some kind of phantom operation. That's when I realized what I'd really been doing. I hadn't been delivering information packages between legitimate businesses. I'd been part of a network that moved something much more valuable and dangerous: data, money, or materials that needed to stay off the official grid. The nodes weren't businesses at all, but temporary meeting points used by people who couldn't afford to be connected to each other through normal channels. Yesterday, I found something that confirmed my worst fears. Taped to my car windshield was a newspaper clipping about a federal investigation into money laundering operations in Las Vegas. The article mentioned that authorities were looking into courier networks that used legitimate delivery drivers to move materials between criminal organizations. At the bottom of the clipping, someone had written in red ink, "You're already part of the network, Casey. There's no backing out now." I don't know what I was really delivering that night, or who was behind the network that recruited me. All I know is that I thought I was making a simple food delivery, but I ended up becoming a courier for something much darker and more dangerous. If you work food delivery and you get an order for information packages or sensitive materials, decline it immediately. If the payout seems too good to be true, it probably is. And if anyone ever gives you a tracking device and tells you to follow specific routes, you're not delivering food anymore. Because some networks don't deliver meals. They deliver secrets, money, and things that can destroy your life if you get caught carrying them. And once you're part of the network, they'll never let you leave.